Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. I'm Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I'm the chair of this committee. On my right is Becky Eads, who is the head of planning. On my left is Ange Bealby, who's from Democratic Services, and to the left of her is Sandra Brannigan, who is the senior solicitor. To the right of Becky is Natalie Ramadan, who's the planning officer for the first application, and there'll be various different planning officers coming up as we go through the applications today, so I'll introduce them as they come to the table. Just a very brief bit of housekeeping before we begin. So we're not expecting a fire alarm today. If the alarms do go off, we'll help everybody to leave the building via the quickest routes. If you've got your mobile phone with you today, can you please make sure that it's either switched off or on silent? There are toilets that are behind me over my left shoulder, which members of the public can use. Members of the committee are not allowed to leave the table during hearings. So we will try to stagger adjournments, and we'll either take them in between items, or if we've been going for a long time, I'll take adjournments at appropriate points during the meeting. You may see that some members have got laptops out. Some members prefer to use papers. Some members prefer to use laptops. They'll be reading the papers online or potentially looking at the plans that we'll be going through in a few minutes' time. In terms of apologies for today's meeting, I've received two sets of apologies. So Councillor Eyre is being substituted by Councillor Vassey today, and Councillor Kelly is being substituted by Councillor Ben Burton. Just to briefly outline for anybody who hasn't been to a planning meeting before, how the meeting will run today. First thing to be clear on, this is a business meeting of the council that is held in public. It's not a public meeting per se. So there's some very specific points where we allow public participation. But if I can just ask anybody in the room who's not on the committee not to try to contact or make anything that's audible to members of the committee during the hearing. And likewise, we do need to be able to concentrate. So if we can just try and keep any sort of whispering to a minimum if you're sat in the public gallery, please. As I mentioned, I'll be taking adjournments at various points during the meeting. If we happen to adjourn between items, during items, members of the committee are very aware that they're not to discuss the item during that adjournment. And again, if I can ask any members of the public present not to approach any members of the committee if we're midway through an item when we take an adjournment. When we come to each individual application, there are 3 applications that we'll be hearing today. What I'll be doing is asking the officers to talk through the plans and asking committee members to seek any points of clarification on the plans. I'll then ask for any updates that may have been received after the reports have been published. We'll then have a public participation section. So there are people registered to speak on each of the applications today, and they'll be invited to come to the table to address the committee. And committee members may wish to ask questions of the members of the public who are speaking. There's then an opportunity for members to ask officers any questions that they have around the report, anything that may have been raised by members of the public. We then have a debate. We then test the officer recommendation, and if the officer recommendation passes, that's the end of the hearing. If the officer recommendation is not upheld, the committee then goes on to decide what alternative course of action they may wish to take with that application. So I hope that's reasonably clear, but I'll be taking us through that as we go through each application as well. So on to the agenda proper then. Agenda item 1 is declarations of interest. So if I can just invite any members who have anything they wish to declare in respect of any of the agenda items today. I'm not seeing any hands, so I take that as nothing to declare. We've got 2 sets of minutes that we need to approve. So the first set of minutes at page 3 from the 7th of March. Is everybody happy that we approve those minutes? Seeing lots of nods, thank you. And then the second set of minutes, which are from the 19th of March, that starts on page 11. Councillor Stewart, I think you had a couple of minor amendments that you wanted to suggest.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, they're excellent minutes as usual. I don't envy the job, and it's very comprehensive. But there's obviously 2 very minor ones. I've given just accuracy, and then there was that Tom Franklin will have given the views of the Green Party, not Tony May. And then the one that is maybe a bit more subjective is at the bottom of page 16. It talks about how many trees would be removed, and says, and the chair detailed the removal of the trees to the committee. And my thought was I'm sure the chair gave a comment on trees, but given we spent lots of time at lots of points in the meeting discussing how many trees would be added and removed, I thought it sounded a bit too comprehensive, the detail you gave us, Chair.
Thank you, and I certainly am not a tree expert, so I don't think I would have been detailing in that way. I think probably this refers to when we were discussing the photographs. There was aerial photographs that we had, and we were just clarifying which sections of trees were or weren't to be removed. So if we just find a form of wording that just reflects that, so that it makes clear that it's not me that's the expert here. So with those amendments, was there anything else that anybody else wish to amend on those? Okay, so if everyone's happy, I will sign those minutes as well. Fab. So that then takes us to agenda item 3, which is the public participation on the general remit of the committee. We've not had anybody register for that, which means that we can get down to business. Agenda item 4A, which is the application for Bradley's Farm Shop, New Lane, Huntington, York. And this is for the erection of a children's charity children's centre with outdoor recreation facilities. If I could invite Becky to talk us through the plans, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a full planning application for the erection of a children's charity centre with outdoor recreational facilities to include landscaping, footpaths, crossings, car parking, cycle parking, following the demolition of the existing barn and polytunnel. So you can see the site is outlined here in red. I'm just going to change my pointer to a laser pointer here in red. Again, the aerial image of the site with the wider context there. You can see the site in here. Again, aerial image towards Monk's Cross, Park and Ride in the Vanguard Retail Centre. You can see up here. Again, more photos for context. The existing site entrance, from the entrance northbound along New Lane, south of the site towards the site entrance. So this is your existing site location plan in here. And this is the proposed site layout plan, as you can see. The new development in here, and car parking and access here. So there's proposed elevations that you can see there, southwest and northwest. Again, more elevations of the proposal, including landscaping. And yeah, further cross sections where you can see. These are all in your agenda pack if you want to look further. And then the proposed ground floor plan, you can see. And the illustrative master plan. I'm going to leave it on the master plan and refer you to Natalie for the update.
I'm going to take the update in a moment. So if there's just any questions from members on any points of clarity on the plans themselves, Councillor Nelson.
Just for the clarity for members, is it possible that you could go back to the big aerial view and point out the area that has been agreed permission for the outline planning permission for 300 houses on New Lane? I think it's that field at the top that goes down to the cemetery, to the north of the cemetery. But I feel like it would be worth everybody knowing where that is. The one that was allowed on appeal in 2021. My understanding is it's that whole top bit. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I just wanted to be absolutely sure I was right. So this bit here is the one that's got the approval on it, up here.
Sorry,
Right.
Can I just be clear? We need to defer to officers on this.
I will get you a plan of it when you're doing the update so you can see it. And that's the cemetery there, but I will get you a better plan. Yes. In the interim.
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Merritt.
Given the nature of the application, are there any associated proposals for improving the cycle facilities on the actual road out to and from it? You know, when I cycled up there, it's a pretty hostile environment.
So I think that is a question that when we come to
Questions?
members asking questions of officers on the main report, absolutely something that I'm very happy for you to ask, but we're just on the detail of the plan at the minute. Okay.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to suggest that we, I was just going to say, so Natalie, if you could just give us any update on the report as published, and then if we've got something that we can show, we'll show it. If not, I will go into public participation, but I'll make sure that we've got something that we can show members before we go into questions on the main report. So Natalie.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of an update on this application, we have received an additional letter of support from the Ward Councillor of Huntington and New Ayswick Ward. I've set out the full letter of support below, but just to summarise, the Ward Councillor is in support of the application and notes that the island is a well-known and well-respected charity who provides vital mentoring and support to children and young people. Although this proposed development is in the Greenbelt, there is now the opportunity to be able to utilise a previously empty building which is set in an area of unused open space, and this development would give young people who need help most the chance to enjoy surroundings designed especially for their use. The Ward Councillor has visited the premises and states it is clear that there is plenty of room inside and outside, so all activities can take place. And in terms of the conditions, the full list of conditions were sent to the agent. In response, the agent has requested the pre-commencement conditions be updated to prior to commencement of development apart from demolition for the following conditions: 11, 15, 16, 20, 22, 24 and 26. This is to allow them to start demolition prior to discharging these conditions. We have reviewed this request and agreed to this apart from condition 24, which is not a pre-commencement condition. The agent did also request conditions 9 and 31 be merged, but because these are from separate consultees, we've decided to keep them separate for the purposes of discharging the conditions. The additional information has been assessed and the office's recommendation remains for approval as set out within the public report, subject to the update of the wording to conditions 11, 15, 16, 20, 22 and 26 to refer to prior to commencement of development excluding demolition. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And have we now got a plan?
So there's your site location plan there of this site. This, you can just see, and I will give you the concept. I'll make it go a bit smaller. Can't see that here, but there's the existing, for context, existing housing up here. And the existing housing is there and it runs along the side of this here. Just flick back all the way up to the cemetery there, which is here. So it runs along there. You got it? Right.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Also in 1.9, it says the parcel of land immediately north is currently subject to a planning application for residential and pending consideration. Is that the whole of the site to the north going up to the cemetery as well?
That bit there. Can
Right,
you see mine? I've not got, hang on a minute. Sorry. It's because that bit there.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Okay.
Okay, are we all clear on all of that? And any further questions on the specifics of the plan? No.
Just one more point from me.
Yes.
Just to refer members, this is just for clarity more than anything else. In terms of the permission in front of you, it is for a children's charity, which is in the description, but there is also a condition 3, which is, I'm sure, I just wanted to outline it because I thought it may come up as a question. The site shall operate in strict accordance with the submitted operator statement dated July 2023 at all times, which shows that it should be used by the island. So just thought I'd preempt that for you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move us then into public participation. We've got 4 registered speakers for this item. The first person that's registered to speak is Diane Breen. If you'd like to come to the table. Speakers have 3 minutes to address the committee. What I'll do is I'll ask Ange to time for me. When it looks like you've got about 30 seconds left, I'll give you a little nudge unless it sounds as though you're winding up, in which case I'll try not to. You just need to press the green button to turn your microphone on, which you've done. If you'd like to just start then in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I'm here in my capacity as the Chair of Huntington Parish Council. You will be aware that the Parish Council has objected to the application on various grounds, mainly that it is green belt. We are not NIMBYs in Huntington, and we fully support the crucial work the island does to support vulnerable young people in our community. However, our local plan agreed by our residents does not allow for any further building on New Lane, which is all green belt. We have, however, supported an application for 970 homes on the land to the north of Monks Cross, which shows our commitment to providing much needed homes. Currently on New Lane, there is to be 275 additional houses built next to our cemetery, which CYC and the Parish Council have objected to, but sadly the Secretary of State upheld the appeal by the builders. We are to have another application shortly for another 109 homes on the other side of the cemetery. Since this application was made, flooding in our cemetery has become so bad, we've spent several £1,000s on investigating the cause, which appears to be that the drains put in the cemetery when it was built in the 80s were never joined to the main sewers on New Lane. We await a solution, but we need Yorkshire Water agreement. It may mean actually digging up the road on New Lane. We are concerned even with remedial action, flooding will only get worse if this application is approved. We now cannot have any double graves dug as it is unsafe to dig them due to flooding. And those who have pre-purchased a double depth grave have now been offered 2 single graves side by side at no extra cost. This is impacting on the cemetery's finances, as we only have approximately a maximum of 5 years worth of space in the current cemetery. We are planning on extending onto the land we were gifted many years ago at the back of our current cemetery, which will cost in excess of £150,000. Our children's section of the cemetery is particularly impacted, which is very distressing for those visiting loved ones, and we have attempted remedial work to try and resolve this, including raising the paths. The report is thorough, very thorough, and it also mentions the existing surface water potential and the flow of water discharge needs to be addressed. We also are very concerned with the number of car parking spaces and the lack of public transport. There is one bus that goes down there and it is not reliable.
You've got about 30 seconds left.
Thank you very much. I do note, I am quite surprised that one of the ward councillors has made representations. The ward councillors have always have objected to the 2 proposed building sites, and we would be interested to know which ward councillor it was that actually made the representations, because they have not had any contact with the parish council. And finally, if this is approved and the Secretary of State also approves it, I can assure you Huntington Parish Council wants to work closely with the island. We want to work with them and support them where we can, but we are very concerned in particular in regards to the impact that it has on our cemetery. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. If you want to just stay where you are for just
Yeah,
1
sure.
second. I don't know if members have any questions that they want to ask. No, so, oh, sorry, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Diane. I was just wondering whether the parish council has a comment on the fact that this is not being used for housing, as the other sites that you mentioned have been kind of put forward, or applications coming forward for them being used for housing. Does that have any impact on the parish council's view in terms of the use of this site?
We have a parish plan which went to a vote within the parish and was approved. In that neighbourhood plan, it was agreed that there would be no further planning at all on New Lane whatsoever, irrespective of whether it was housing or any other sort of planning. It would appear that the officer's recommendation is such that the good of having the island there and the work that they do is more, I would say, more important. That's maybe not quite the right phrase to use, but it's worth sacrificing the green belt. Because that's effectively is what will happen. The green belt we will lose yet another big band of green belt in Huntington, and I suspect that because we do have a fair amount of green belt, that I think applications, particularly for housing, might come. There might be more applications. We don't know, but we only know of the 275 and the 109 at the moment. Okay.
Thank you. I'm just double checking if you pick up one of the updates of the additional information, it'll clarify
Oh,
the ward
sorry, yeah,
councillor
thank you.
and all of those
That would be
details of what
useful,
they've said.
thank you.
Yeah. I don't think there was any other questions. So if you'd like to take your place back in the public gallery.
Thank you very much
for your time today. So the next person that is coming to speak is the applicant. So this is Nigel Poppleton, who's the chief exec of the island, and has in attendance with him to answer questions Philip Holmes from O'Neill's, the planning consultant, and Simon Pratt from SCP Transport Planning. So, Mr. Poppleton, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a 30-second warning when you're coming towards the end of your 3 minutes. And then, as I say, if you can just stay put, and there may be some questions for you, and just start in your own time.
Thank you. I'm Nigel Poppleton, CEO of the island, an established York charity that's been supporting and mentoring children since the year 2007, mentoring and supporting the vulnerable, isolated and disadvantaged children across the city. We supported over 3,000 young people through quality mentoring relationships, unlocking their potential through their transition from childhood and adolescence. A lot of these young people, the challenges they face have been bereavement, bullying, school aversion, social isolation, and a lot of mental health issues. And yet there are still hundreds of children across York that do not have that opportunity to unlock their potential. And despite increased demand on our services, the limited space has hindered the vital support that we would wish to provide young people in York. The island acquired the site at New Lane, which would allow significant expansion and enhancement of support of the young people, even more across the city, as we're continually receiving referrals. The new state-of-the-art centre would be an opportunity for greater collaboration between the local authority and charity and local groups. This is building on the relationships we already have. The different ones have been accessing our facilities for one-to-one sessions with social workers. Different community groups have been accessing it for the sensory room. So it's building upon that and just enabling more facilities. The young people, in terms of the plans you have participated in workshops, both in the centre's design and the landscaped outdoor areas. And as you can see from the plan, the majority of the site shall be retained with biodiverse open spaces for interaction with nature and opportunities for peace, quiet, well-being, as well as the other outdoor activities. The new centre would be a first of its kind nationally, offering an interaction between the indoor facilities and the green open space. So symbiotically, two different functions, but in close physical association, so integral to each other, and therefore enhancing the overall experience of all those who would access the site. The island's strategic plan sets out how we shall achieve our mission to deliver this viable and permanently new, safe and inspirational centre.
You've got about 30 seconds.
The island is well placed to deliver this within a realistic short time frame. this is a permanent legacy for York, positively impacting the lives of thousands of children for generations to come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, just invite members if you have questions, and Councillor Fisher, I see you.
Thank you, Mr. Poppleton. Welcome to the committee. My question is about how the island is funded. And the reason I want to bring this up is that clearly what we are being asked to do is approve a fairly large building in the Greenbelt. Now, obviously, the very special circumstances relate to the excellent work the island does. But my worry is what happens if for some reason your funding streams dry up and we're left then with a very large building, and what alternative use we'd have. So I'd just like to know what your funding sources are. Are they totally resilient? Will you be able to continue the excellent work into the future?
The short answer is yes. We have funding for both the capital costs and obviously the ongoing running costs. We've been doing this now for 15 years. Obviously, the new centre will allow us to support more people. There would be the Public Cafe, which would obviously bring some resources. We have very supportive benefactors who would wish that this would continue. So we're looking at a sustainable long-term.
Thank you. I just want to be reassured that this is not going to come back and bite us in the future if anything.
It won't. I can assure you it won't bite. And
Councillor Fisher, I'm just going to interrupt. We've just been having a debate about how far down that route we can go in terms of what's material to the planning decision. I think the answer that Mr. Poppleton gave to your first question is covered it. And just to reassure members, I think Becky drew attention to condition 3 on page 64, and also the wording of the application in terms of what's actually being applied for, I think was sought to cover off some of what you're getting at in terms of the decision that we have to then weigh today. Okay. Councillor Merritt.
Can I ask how you anticipate the young people getting to the site? What's your view of how they'll get there, adequacies of that? And so on?
yes, some of that is within the statements that have been submitted, but in terms of the young people, they're able to come there independently by themselves, and that might you raised about the cycling. Parents, carers would drop young people off. There is public transport, there is park and ride. We also have minibuses for those young people that it would be more challenging for them to be able to access public services.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for your planning consultants, if that's all right. Just around, I'm aware that the date that this application was submitted means that it doesn't qualify for the 10% biodiversity net gain, but I see that there's obviously a lot of work's gone into thinking about the landscaping. Is it meeting a 10% biodiversity net gain or thereabouts?
Yeah, it's quite significantly exceeding the 10%. You can see from the site that 3/4 is open. We're replacing what is currently open grassland, basically former grazing land, with a comprehensive landscaping scheme, big biodiversity enhancements, mitigation for newts in terms of the ponds across to the east there you can just see. And there's also landscape and biodiversity management plans conditioned where we can demonstrate and actually submit details for approval on this.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of employment taking place on the land, what kind of, how many people are you expecting to have working for the charity on the land on sort of a regular and a permanent basis? And can I also just sort of ask about their transport needs as well, if there have been any further considerations for them? Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Nigel. Yeah, we've set this out in a transport assessment addendum, which splits out the various uses, including the staff for the island, any third-party staff which might be present on all day at the site, third-party use which might occur during the day, which is not when the island children would be present at the facility, and then when the island are there with their mentors, and then the evening use which might be from third-party only for the sports hall. So all of that's accounted for in terms of both the impacts from traffic generation, but also the level of parking that's on the site.
Okay, not seeing any further questions. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Mr. Poppleton, I think you're going to stay at the table because the next person speaking is Faye Simpson. So if Mr. Holmes and Mr. Pratt could take your places back in the gallery, and then Faye, if you're happy to come up and speak. You'll have seen now how it works. You just need to push, there's a little button in the middle of your sort of black box there, just to switch on your microphone. You have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll try not to interrupt you, but if I think you're going to go over, I'll just give you a little 30-second warning. Okay.
I would like to. Sorry, it's really helped me to gain confidence. I joined when I was 11 and struggling with a lot of bullying and selective mutism in school, and it gave me a safe space to kind of speak to people outside of the kind of school environment. And I also learnt a lot more about confidence to join other people. I also had a mentor called Joy, and they'd done a lot of research into who would be a perfect fit for my personality, and it got me out of the house a lot more. And this was built over a lot of years, from being 11 until kind of recently when I left. It's given me the confidence to now go on to university and speak to new people, and also have a part-time job where I speak to people really regularly. And I don't think I would have got to this point as soon as I have done without that kind of support. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really appreciate you coming in and speaking to us and telling us a little bit about that. That's really, really helpful for us all. I don't know, members, if anybody has any questions. I'm not seeing anybody with a hand up, but thank you very much for your time today. If you'd like to take your seat back in the gallery, and you can continue watching as we deliberate. But just before we get to the next part, we have one last public speaker, which is Councillor Bob Webb, who is the exec member for Children, Young People and Education. And you know very well how it all works, so I don't need to tell you. Start in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. I was really upset that I was following Faye there, because you're never going to manage to do better than that, and that was really powerful. And sort of shows a little bit of what the island can and does do. It's good to be back in a planning committee. It's been a while. I've definitely missed them. So yeah, I'm here to support the principle of this application and what it's about. As exec member, I'm very keen that our administration support those who are disadvantaged and vulnerable, obviously. And this meets our ambition to be a health generating city by supporting young people through positive relationships. And as exec member for Children, Young People and Education, I see very clearly on a regular basis the issues that young people do face in our city. And I think that this charity is doing really positive things, as are a number of other organisations in the city and as our council staff. But I really do see this as an asset. I think as a space, as councillors, we can all agree that there is always a need for more community space. And I'd hope that whilst this is obviously something for this charity, that it can be seen as an asset. And you heard earlier on from the applicant about how they hope that they can work more closely with the city. And this gives us all an opportunity. I think for me, when I've been in the past on planning committees, one of the things that I've always wanted to look for is those sort of nuanced arguments from a sort of an independent organisation. And I think if you look at the arguments laid out by the Civic Trust specifically within the papers, you know, that there's clearly issues that the Civic Trust have raised, but there's clearly benefits that they've raised. And I actually think that, you know, they've said that the positives of the planting, the landscaping, to name but one, but I actually think in general their arguments that they've made in the report are pretty clear and well reasoned, and I ask that you consider those. You'll also see that there's a long list of supporters, including both York Central and York Out as MPs, the Archbishop of York, and now at the last minute, apparently one of the ward councillors as well. So there are, you know, there's clearly two sides to this, but I think in general, this is a really positive application, and I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Okay, any questions from members? Nope. Thank you very much.
I didn't think you'd say much to me.
You are
Cheers.
obviously
Thank you.
always
See you later.
welcome at a planning committee, and you can always come and sit and watch what we get up to if you miss it. So that concludes the public participation. So I'm going to move us on to members' questions to officers on the report and anything that might have been raised during public participation. So this is just, again, the opportunity to clarify anything within the report and ask for any further detail. Councillor Merritt, I think you had a question that you had put, so I'll go to you first while I'm getting everybody else's hands.
Yes, I had a prior question on the report. Was Active England consulted, and have they declined to respond or just not responded?
Do you mean Active Travel?
Active Travel, sorry.
Yeah. No, they weren't consulted.
I'll double check, but I don't think there's a requirement for this type of development. And when it was submitted, I don't think there was a statutory consultee at that point anyway.
No. Okay. Can I now ask the question that I did earlier? You know, if we have young people cycling to this facility, it's obviously important that we have safe roads outside, if at all possible. So I was wondering what consideration officers have given to how cyclists will get to and from this site, how they will turn off New Lane safely, and so on. Thank you.
In terms of cycle lanes, just get a picture of the new lane up. There is an existing cycle lane, as you can see there, on the left-hand side, which is going to remain in place. There's a new pedestrian crossing going outside the access, and a new 3 metre wide footway and cycleway on the other side of the road. So there'll be 2 cycle lanes on both sides of the road, and a dedicated crossing point in the middle of the crossing for cyclists as well.
Is that being funded by this development or separately?
Yes, the applicant is funding it.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Nelson was supplementary.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify in terms of the pedestrian crossing, because I think it says it's a floating island. Is that right? Or have I read that somewhere else? My question is that a signalled crossing? I was going to say, it's got tactile paving and a floating island, but it's not a signalled
No
crossing,
signals.
was my
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah.
I take it that's not something we can consider or request, or
We've looked at it with highways colleagues, and a pedestrian crossing is thought to be the most reasonable for that development and for that road, because there's also a traffic regulation order to slow the road down to 30 miles an hour as well. So put it all together, that's how we've come to the decision.
Okay, Councillor Steels-Walshaw was next.
Thank you, Chair. It was regarding something Diane said earlier regarding the cemetery flooding, and whether that's been looked at in relation to this and whether it would have an impact, and also wondered, because Diane did speak about the cost and possibly needing to do some work on the flooding, could it be a condition that the flooding throughout the whole area was something that was looked at?
So we have taken a considerable amount of time over this flooding. We have looked at flooding in quite in depth. We can't make this development correct other issues that are already there. They can only look at any potential impact that this development would cause. And that's what we've done. We've been through it. Our drainage engineers looked at it. We've been all through that, and we're happy at this point now, subject to the conditions, that the impact from this development, it won't counter anything that's already happening, because that's not what it's hit. That's not reasonable to do. But in terms of the impact of this development through the conditions, we're confident that they can be mitigated.
So supplementary from Councillor Nelson, and Councillor Merritt, was that also supplementary to this? So no, new, I'll put you down then. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. On page 33, one of the internal drainage board recommendations was formal soak-away testing before commencement. Is that something that is in a condition, or will definitely be happening?
Yeah, we have conditioned it. I'll just refer you to the right. Number 10.
Apologies. Sometimes I make a note somewhere and then.
Yeah, condition 10. We've conditioned soak-away testing prior to commencement of development.
Thank you.
Okay, next I had Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Moving down the line clearly. I just wanted to ask about the economic aspect of this, whether there was any weight afforded to the new employment that the land and the development might bring. I don't think there's much in the papers about that, particularly in relation to what the land was beforehand, and sort of the balance there on whether it's bringing new jobs or economic impetus. I don't know whether that's there as an option that you considered.
We acknowledge that the previous use of the site was employment use, and this will have an element of employment use, but we haven't considered the specific numbers. So what the previous employment numbers were, or the proposed numbers. We just acknowledge that both uses are going to provide employment in this case. The previous and the proposed, sorry.
Okay, Councillor, we'll come to you, Councillor Merritt, but I'm just going to go around people who haven't asked a question first, and then come back to you. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just about the section 106, so sort of page 31. And obviously we've got this eye-watering figure of 130,000 that was looked at with a residence parking zone, and then obviously it goes on to say that that's not going to be happening, which I welcome. So therefore, the section 106 contribution is effectively 16,000. Now, we've heard obviously about the pedestrian crossing, and that's going to be paid for by the applicant. So is that not in some way effectively a section 106? I mean, presumably the answer is not. But just secondly, it doesn't seem a very high section 106 contribution. Is it in some way, if this was not, for example, a charity and a function like this, it was housing, I'm sure there'd be a whole host of things that would clearly, education and health don't apply in the same way. But did we think about more, to flag up some of the things that have been talked about, because the 16,000 and what it's going to be spent on isn't really going to be changing anything?
It's the type of development what we can request reasonably. So the £16,000 is towards highway works to mitigate the development. It's not housing where we could reasonably ask for it. So that's why we've gone with the £16,000. To go back to your other question, the other works are secured within the conditions, so we're confident, and through the plans that we have, that those works can come forward. We don't need to ask for a contribution, because that will be done as part of the development. We ask for a contribution because, as the council, the traffic regulation order will be done through us, as will £10,000 towards City of York Council plan travel plan support.
I think it might be helpful, because we've had this sort of conversation on different applications, and the thing that I always find helpful to just remember, and this is the thing for committee to weigh, is 106 isn't necessarily just a formula that you apply to every application. It's about mitigating the harms or the problems that a development creates. And so does your 106 mitigate sufficiently to make the development acceptable? And in some cases there may be a 500 houses and 500 cars, and so you need a big contribution towards the highways network to make it acceptable, or it may be a relatively small impact, and so the 106 amount that you ask for, that you require to offset the harm, is of a lower amount. So it's not necessarily that a development of equal size in terms of area or in terms of number of houses might have the same 106 associated with it. So committee has to decide whether we feel that it mitigates sufficiently against the identified harms, rather than have we extracted enough money from the developer, which, you know, maybe some of our mindsets sometimes. That hopefully covers that one. Councillor Merritt, I had you next.
Yeah, it was also on the section 106 on the same, on the contribution for the traffic measures, so it's answered.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one very, very tiny question and then another question, if that's all right. The very tiny question is, within the cycle parking, is there provision for an accessible cycle, or is that something that we can include? I think we have a plan that we agree over that. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, cycle parking, yeah, is condition 26.
Yeah.
We've agreed the locations where they're going to be put on site, but not the specific details and things like that. So,
is that something we can include in those conversations?
Yeah.
Could we note to make sure that accessible cycle parking is?
Yeah.
We would do that. Okay, fine. The big question really is about this greenbelt issue. You know, I've seen the Huntington Parish Council plan, you know, the boundaries of the greenbelt, but this is the reason I asked about that other site to start with. Obviously, the Secretary of State has, to a certain extent, overturned that for essentially 50% of this area that we're looking at that's designated as greenbelt. What impact does that Secretary of State decision have in terms of setting a precedent, in terms of how much weight we can give to the essentially two remaining, that like the half that's remaining, when we're looking at this?
I know we tell you this all the time, but it's each on its own merits. So that is considered on the very special circumstances for that application. So that's what the Secretary of State's done. They've looked and they've considered, and they think that the very special circumstances outweigh the harm. That's how they've come to that decision. But that doesn't set a precedent for what we then consider either with this one or the next one. Because the very special circumstances are specific to the site. So then you have to consider that. So that's why we've given you the very special circumstances for this one, and then the planning balance that we think, because clearly we had a different opinion to the Secretary of State in terms of the balance for the other one. But they clearly didn't agree with us. Whereas this one, we've looked at it and we've made the balance and we've looked at the very special circumstances. So that's the difference. It doesn't set a precedent. We look at the circumstances for each individual site.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
I think it might be helpful as well, just so that everybody's clear, just to clarify the relationship between the neighbourhood plans, the local plan, the current situation with the local plan and Greenbelt in terms of, obviously the report sets out, you know, we identify harm and then we're identifying special circumstances and we're making a planning judgment between the two. But just the relationship of the neighbourhood plans within that judgment, I think it would just be helpful for everybody to be clear on.
So yeah, the neighbourhood plans carry full weight, so you do have to give that consideration, and as officers have done as part of the report. Obviously the local plan is at an advanced stage, so that's also given weight, not full weight because we're not there yet. And obviously national policy is given full weight. So you've got all those things to balance up with the very special circumstances.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? Okay, so we can then move into debate. So this is the section where I'm just inviting people not to necessarily make a proposal at this stage, but just to perhaps give an indication of where they're thinking, what the sorts of things are that you're weighing up. And if I can just remind members, I say this every time, but if somebody makes a whole host of great points, please feel free to say I agree with them rather than then repeating the same set of points. But as I say, if I can invite members to speak, and Councillor Burton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, what we're being asked here is about the local plan and the green belt and very special circumstances. And I think with this application, we've got a number of very special circumstances. It's a very special charity that does a lot of great work in the city. And it's actually a very good application in terms of the design approach that they've taken, both in terms of the massing and the way that actually improves on the biodiversity of the site, taking what is a monoculture field and turning it into what is a very well landscaped area of site. I think my only concerns coming to the committee today was around transport, but actually the applicant's gone above and beyond in terms of some of the works that they're doing to the adopted highway and what's being done there. So I'm very comfortable with what's being offered there, and I would have no issues supporting the application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm looking at this as well through the eyes of how does this impact on the green belt and the broader situation. And obviously we all take that seriously. Two things give me encouragement about this proposal. The first is paragraph 3.2, where the applicant is declaring that they want to achieve a carbon reduction of 85.8%. And I compare that to what we're able to ask for currently with our local plan and everything. And I applaud their ambition, because what that says to me is that they do care about the situation that we're in. And I'd like to think that at some point the committee actually welcomes the fact that the applicant is going way beyond what we can ask for. That matters. And in that context, what it also says to me in relation to the landscaping and everything else is that there seems to be a recognition, I hope I've understood all of this correctly, there seems to be a recognition of the part that the environment that this building is going to be set in will play in terms of education. And I hope that those opportunities are fully employed. And I would only suggest to the applicant that we talk routinely in Planning B about swift boxes and things like that. There are huge opportunities here in terms of education to really use this site to help children and the environment and the green belt and the city. And I welcome that. In my own ward, we've got an education charity called Ad Astra, working with Natural England in just that kind of a way. And I hope that that is something that's taken up. So in balance, I think this is a good application.
Thank you. I saw Councillor Fisher next, and then I've seen Councillor
Thank you,
Nelson.
Chair. There is no doubt that this is a reasonably large building and much bigger than the buildings it replaces. So in strict terms, it is clearly inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. So it all comes down to very special circumstances. Now, the very special circumstances in this case are the need across the city and in Huntington alone, because Huntington say they will support something where there's an established parish need for support for young people. Now, I really wish the island had been around when I was teaching at Huntington School, because I can think of many, many students who would have benefited enormously from the service it offers. And on that basis, I'm now satisfied that it is going to continue in perpetuity and we're not going to be left with a building that somebody else has to take over. I think it's a very well-designed building in the sense that it's very environmentally friendly. I feel that on this occasion, I can overcome my natural resistance to building in the Greenbelt and offer it my support.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. I would like to echo my agreement with many of the points that have been made. I also think that it's worth kind of highlighting the fact that, as we've seen in different circumstances, some of this Greenbelt land is being lost almost entirely into housing in other areas of Huntington. And actually something that this site does is to a certain extent preserve a chunk of this as Greenbelt in a slightly different, more landscaped form in perpetuity. And I think there's a real value in that. I know that you can't really do ifs and buts, but I think that the landscaping, the way that it's the way that biodiversity has been really taken into account, I think there's a value there. I also, if I read paragraph 154 of the MPPF in the reports rightly, there is something in there about developing sports facilities on the green belt as one of those areas where sometimes that can be a mitigation, that can be a very special circumstance. So I think this is doing a couple of different things, and I'm very happy that the special circumstances required have been met. The alternative sites have been looked at and wouldn't work, and that in many ways it is preserving a big chunk of this site in some sort of natural form, which I think is a really positive thing.
Okay, I'm not seeing further hands. I'm not going to particularly echo points that have been made, but I'm going to agree with an awful lot of points that have been made. My observation would be that were this not in the green belt, we would be absolutely welcoming this with open arms without any hesitation whatsoever. The fact that it is in the green belt, does require us to assess and make sure that those special circumstances are met. And I think we've probably all sat and seen applications that we naturally want to support that are in areas where there's controversy, and you're seeking perhaps trying to make something more of or something less of an issue to try to make the case for special circumstances or otherwise. I think this one is so patently obvious that really it makes it quite easy in that respect. I do acknowledge, the concerns of the Huntington Parish Council and the impact there, but I think sometimes we come to situations whereby the reasons why a green belt is set up and it is established, even with all of that there, you have to look at it and say, we have to find the special circumstances in this case. And as Councillor Nelson's and others have pointed out, actually the biodiversity gain that is being proposed as part of this, I think in some ways improves the land that's actually would otherwise be retained were it refused on greenbelt grounds. And finally, just to echo Councillor Vassie in terms of welcoming applicants who go over and above. Again, another frustration I know of the committee is what we can ask for within the legislation, and sometimes it feels as though applicants go just a nudge across the line, and actually to see something come forward that is significantly across that line and actually setting hopefully a precedent for other people developing buildings around the city, I think is also something that is very much acting in its favour as we look at it as a committee. So I take us then to test the officer recommendation. I think the gauging of the reading the room, I think I know which way this one may go, but I'm looking for somebody to propose. I actually saw Councillor Merritt's hand go slightly before Councillor Nelson's. So Councillor Merritt.
Yes. Can I move the amended recommendations, please?
Okay. And Councillor Nelson, are you wishing to
Formally
second?
seconded.
Okay. So Becky, if you could just set out what exactly we'll be voting on.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is recommended for approval, subject to referral to the Secretary of State and the conditions as amended in the additional information. Thank you.
Okay, so by show of hands, can I see all those in favour of that proposal? And anybody against? Any abstentions? So that is passed unanimously, and that goes to the Secretary of State for the final approval. Thank you. So it's 5:30. I'm going to suggest we take a short adjournment now for 5 minutes. If I can ask members to come back by 5:25 to 6, please. everybody to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. We are now moving on to agenda item 4B, which is the North Selby Mine, New Road, Deighton. We're joined at the table by Eric Matthews, who's the Development Management Officer who has been handling this application. I'm going to go, however, to Becky to just talk us through the plans.
Thank you, Chair. So you are considering a reserved matters application for appearance, landscaping, layout, scale of development for the redevelopment of the former North Selby mine site to leisure development comprising a range of touring caravan and static caravans and associated facilities following the grant of outline permission. So as I've explained to members before, the principle of development at this site has already been established. This is just looking at the 4 reserved matters that you have in front of you. So this is the aerial photograph of the mine that you can see there. That's the North Selby mine internal parking area. You can see there's just a lot of open land at the moment. The existing site viewed from the east with the existing buildings and the vehicular access into the site. So this is the master plan for the site. You can see access in here, caravans in here, entertainment area and buildings, and again, touring caravans in here. So that's the location and layout of the amenity buildings, the dark buildings there that you can see. You'll probably be able to see them better on your handouts. Again, amenities, facilities, proposed plans. Quickly skim through these. These are the entertainment and the proposals, staff accommodation, reception. And then the landscaping overview, you can see the landscaping that's proposed here. This isn't on your pack, but I've added it today because this outlines your parameters of your outline application because it was brought up, which specifically illustrates where the static caravans were going to go and where the touring caravans was going to go, which is in line with your reserved matters, because I thought that might come up as a question. So there it is for you. There's your plan that shows. Okay, that's it from me.
Okay, so any questions, points of clarity on the plans that we've just seen? Councillor Nelson.
I think I know which one, but can we just point out, please, which of the amenity buildings is the toilet block? On the big plan. I'm guessing it's the one labelled welfare facilities, but.
Yeah, do you mean the welfare facilities is here? Yeah, that's it. Yes.
Okay, any further questions of clarity on the plan? No, we're not seeing any. Eric, any update on the report?
Very quickly. 2 sections. Short one of corrections. References to chalets in the report should read static caravans. The applicant, after the report was prepared, has pointed out to me that in terms of total numbers of caravans, they're looking at 92 touring caravan pitches and 231 static caravan pitches, which are the numbers that were conditioned in the outline planning permission previously, and the Section 73 application was granted in 2020. So, and they are to the approved density. Estrick Parish Council have made further representations, specifically in respect of usage of the amenity and entertainment buildings. They should be restricted to those resident at the site with no day visitors. And also restrictions should be placed upon opening hours with no amplified or live music, and restrictions on window and door openings, and also in respect of permitted development rights and movement within the use class. In response to the first issue, a draft condition is proposed in respect of restricting the use of the facilities at the site to those resident, and the applicant has indicated that they are supportive of that. In other respects, operation of the buildings is subject to a noise management plan that was approved under the previous outline permission. In terms of permitted development rights, the entertainment buildings form part of the wider use of the site, which is a caravan site, and so they do not have permitted development rights in themselves. In terms of the use class, the site is a caravan site, which is sui generis and not within a specific use class. And so there is no permitted change within the scope of the use classes order. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So I will now move us on to public participation. We have one registered speaker, which is Bruno Hanneman. If you'd like to come to the table, please. And you'll see on the microphone block in front of you, there's 3 buttons, and the middle one that looks a bit like a Wi-Fi signal. If you push that, it should go green. That means your microphone's live, and then you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and I'll give you a little warning if I think you're going to go over that 3 minutes. Okay, if you'd just like to start in your own time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors, committee, chair. I'm Bruno Hanneman, resident at number 1 Shipwalk Cottages, just outside the north boundary of the proposed site. I'm here representing myself and my partner, Michelle Mulder, my neighbors, Simon and Charlotte Edwards, from number 2 Shipwalk Cottages, and Walter and Julie Bedford and their family from Shipwalk Farm. We jointly object to this reserve matters application as it includes significant changes and additional commercial uses not in the original outline consent. The outline approval specified a low-key holiday park with limited amenities, including touring and static caravans, with only 2 buildings, a reception or shop and a cafe bar, without permanent accommodation. This new application introduces various new buildings and uses, such as the entertainment area, swimming pool, permanent staff accommodation, nail bar, salon, laundrette, cafe, wine bar, gym, spa, and a large restaurant, which were not approved previously, and some of which are in close proximity to the north boundary of the site where I live. The addition of these new facilities also introduced by stealth the possibility of changing to some other entertainment. These changes will significantly impact the local residents with increased noise. The local environment is green belt with no urban noise or lightscape. The addition of these entertainment facilities with long operating hours until 11 p.m. will certainly introduce unacceptable levels of disturbance for us neighbors. The initial approved aim to ensure a quiet neighborly holiday park, but the current proposal deviates substantially, potentially attracting non-residents. I notice here the restriction of non-residents, but maybe in future, an increasing noise and traffic to the site. These new additions,
30 seconds left.
These new additions should be removed if they are to be considered, a revised full planning application must be submitted for proper review by the planning committee. These views are shared by a number of residents in the area, including a very well-reasoned objection by Mrs. Lillian Colson, which I have printed copies here, and I request to be read in full by the committee before consideration for approval. This application, as it stands, undermines the original consent and must be refused unless revised to align with the approved outline consent. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time today. If you just want to hang on for 1 second, are there any questions from members? Councillor Bassey.
Can I ask a question of officers in relation to what we've just heard at this point? Is that?
We'll come to officer questions.
We'll come to that
this is just
later.
about gathering information at the moment. But if you have a question for officers, we'll be there in
In which
as soon
case,
as we finish
I
deciding.
will direct something to the applicant then. So have you been in your house for a long time? Were you there before planning permissions were granted to create the campsite that is being
Councillor Bassey,
created?
I can't ask the person to address that because the principle of the development has been established by the outline application.
I'd just like to
So,
understand how long he's been there.
but it has to be material to the planning application, and because this is a reserve matters application, that the principle of the development has been established. Therefore, any impact upon other residents around the area has been considered at the outline stage, and therefore we are just looking at the aspects that are within the reserve matters. So that isn't a material question to this planning decision, and therefore we can't allow that question.
But the applicant is saying that the
objector.
number of buildings have changed.
The objector, so the gentleman.
Sorry, the applicant, sorry, the
is the
objector. Sorry, yes, I'm getting that completely wrong. I hope I'll be able to ask questions of officers.
You absolutely can ask questions for clarification of officers, and it's perfectly fine to ask questions if you think that the number of buildings has changed sort of since the outline, but the principle has been established. So actually it's not material to the principle of the development. We are just looking at the reserve matters, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. Any further question for the public participant? No. Okay, thank you for your time today, Mr. Hanneman. You did mention the written objection. The process is that those objections go to the planning officer, and the officer takes into account anything that's raised within the objections, and they're addressed within the report. But I can't accept a further objection comment at this point in the process. So if that was a comment that was submitted in the consultation period, it will have been taken into account and addressed within the report.
My request is for the committee members to actually read that, not just the view from the
I understand
planning
that.
officer.
That's not the process that we follow. There's the opportunity for people to put in their comments and objections or supporting messages. If councillors wish, as committee members wish to read through those on applications, they're there in the public domain, but the officers take all of the points that are raised in any whether it's any form of comment on an application, and they're taken into account and addressed. You'll see if you read the report, it'll say how many written objections were received and what the gist of those was, and then they're addressed within the report. Okay, thank you. So move on then to questions to officers, and Councillor Bassey, I think you had questions that you wanted to ask of the officers, and if anybody else wants to indicate, I'll just make a note.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'd like to understand what has changed between the previous application, which I believe was approved in 2021, and the current one, in terms of the number of buildings that are envisaged as remaining as a legacy of the previous mine works. Has there been a change, and how's it worked?
With the outline commission, there was a condition requiring a recreational strategy. And related to the recreational strategy, the applicant has, with the reserve matters, indicated to retain the pre-existing buildings that remained from the previous mine and reuse them. Over and above what was there intended previously, several of them, I believe the welfare facilities building and the site reception were in the original outline, although I didn't deal with it at the time. The recreational strategy was designed and is conditioned on the outline permission on the basis that as it stood, there would be significant traffic movements on and off the site from people staying on the site
and that they'll be minimising them by retaining the existing buildings for a form of recreational use. They have also submitted, and it is conditioned on the outline permission, and also there is another condition requiring strict adherence to it on here, should members be wish to approve, in terms of a noise management plan. The noise management plan restricts hours of operation of particular uses, in fact, all the entertainment type uses, and also levels of noise that is audible from outside of the site. From memory, in respect of the various uses, there is reference to a bowling alley. That was one that, if de-restricted, would cause felt to cause issues in terms of noise outside of the site. And the management plan requires and is accepted by the applicant, and has been undertaken by the applicant, to provide a form of insulation so that it would not be audible outside of the site. Public protection have been consulted on the various entertainment uses that will be added onto the site, and they are happy that they would not cause an issue of harm to those living outside of the site.
So my question was, if we go back several steps, this is for the benefit of the committee. I grew up in Deighton.
Yes.
I remember I was a child when the mine first arrived, and the condition was that when the mine ceased operation, all the buildings would be removed and the land would be returned to Greenbelt. In the intervening period since, things have changed. There have been a number of planning applications. My question was, when last approval was given, was it assumed that all the buildings on the site would stay there, or was it understood that some of them would go or some of them would remain? What was the context? Because what we've heard is from the objector that more buildings are being kept than were previously agreed to be kept. So I just want to understand exactly where we are over the past 20 years.
There was no agreement to take away. There was no agreement to take away any of the other buildings. That was left for consideration.
There was prior to 2003, but you're saying since then things have changed. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stewart, I had your hand next, and I've seen Councillor Whitcroft.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and just for openness, my partner and her family own caravan parks, so not anywhere near here at all. My question's about day visitors. I'm just wondering what sort of level is of a day visitor and what's allowed on what.
There is a condition prescribing day visitors, and the applicant has indicated that they will not allow day visitors, and the condition of being able to book access to the entertainment facilities and to book on the site is that there will not be a day visitor associated with that.
So just sorry, I appreciate that. It says about day visitors, and I appreciate its condition. Okay, so if I was staying in a touring caravan and I've come up from London and I want to meet up with Councillor Vassey, for example, who knows the area and everything like that, would he not be allowed on the site?
You would. You would have to report to reception and gain access to the site.
Right. So my point, what I'm trying to ascertain is, obviously there's different levels of how you come on site. So some sites have it, so you cannot have visitors on the site without the explicit permission of the site owner. Okay. At the other end, some sites have facilities which are completely open to everybody. So where does the restriction sit on that line in terms of, could I meet somebody? I appreciate that obviously that, if you live in Deighton, for example, you're not going to be able to join as a member of the gym.
No.
But is it a total ban on day visitors, or is it day visit? I mean, for example, if, in that example, I'm staying on the site, Councillor Vassey comes and I say, let's go to the restaurant. Would that be allowed, or would that not be allowed?
That would not be allowed within the terms of what has been submitted.
Okay, but he would be allowed on the site to meet me in my caravan.
That would not be allowed either. You would have to, presumably you would have to have the permission of the owner.
Right.
Site owner, yes.
Okay, that's fine. But if we're saying you're not allowed on the site as a day visitor,
Yes.
except with the permission of the site owner,
Yes.
then you are allowed on the site.
No, the condition, I'll find it for you.
It's condition 6.
Condition
On
6.
page 134.
Thank you. Condition 6 on 134.
It's all facilities.
All facilities in the site, including entertainment and facilities, shall be used for the sole use of those resident within the site, static and shall not be separately leased by individuals or groups. So, yes, I don't know how exactly we'd be able to get into the site, whether or not somebody could come and sit in your caravan with you, but they couldn't then use the facilities on site. They wouldn't be allowed to do that. I don't know that we've tied it down to the fact that there's going to be a man stood at anybody stood at there's somebody at a box at the end that says you can only come in if you've got your tag type situation. I don't know about that, but what we have said is the facilities on site can only be used by residents. I don't think, but in terms of reasonableness of a planning condition, could we stop somebody, unless there is that tut or whatever they're called at the beginning, which there isn't on this, reasonably stop somebody to come and sit in your caravan for the day? Probably not.
Okay, well, there may be a barrier at the site, and then obviously if you book on, you get the code for.
Yes, that's it.
Or
Yeah.
different. My point is not particularly where that line should be in terms of what is allowed. I don't have a view on that. My point is that we need clarity, or not necessarily we need, as a committee need clarity, but in the conditions there needs to be clarity. Because if I don't think there is on this. Because obviously not to be leased by a group, I can't book the swimming pool, fine, no problem at all that. I can't book the gym, I can't be a member of the gym if I'm not a resident. But it says, or not resident of the approved development. For me, that whole point about, can you visit me in my caravan? There's no clarity on that here. And if you can visit me in my caravan, then the idea that you in some way, the owner is in some way going to be able to stop people wandering across to the restaurant with their friend is just not plausible. So it's like the question about the enforceability and reasonableness. I'm not saying where the line is, but
so I think then what we need to do is if committee members feel that in order for the development to be acceptable, it requires tighter wording of that condition to cover off those eventualities that you are at. If when we get to the point of testing the recommendation, if the committee feels that the wording needs to be tighter, there's an opportunity to tighten the wording further from what is currently written. And if that then means that it's acceptable, that's the point of a condition. And if we feel that it's not acceptable or feel that it's perfectly acceptable as is, then the committee makes that decision. I think that's where we have to go with that one for now. Okay. Councillor Vassie, I saw your hand go. I had got Councillor Whitcroft. Was it supplementary to what was being discussed? In which case, I'll go to Councillor Whitcroft first.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanting to ask in relation to the wine bar, obviously you mentioned about public protection and the need to make sure that obviously anywhere there is serving alcohol, there needs to be a degree of public protection, particularly for local residents. I just want to know if you could go in a bit more detail around there, what public protection have said as to whether there are any problems associated with serving alcohol on site and what impact that could have within the area.
Well, no, they haven't, because it's on the basis that it's served to residents on the site and they're subject to the problems with this type of site normally relate to people coming onto it. It's the residents who are operating on it, and they are subject to the controls on noise outlined in the recreation strategy and the noise management plan.
Yes.
As part of the outline.
Okay. All right, then. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions, really. The first one is about ecology. So in para 514, 13 and 14, we see that we've got a rare grassland habitat here with rare species on it. And then we see the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust expressing grave concern about pets, especially cats, on such a site. Bear in mind, we're talking about 231 static caravans. If just 2 of those had cats, for a period of time, they could decimate the wildlife population. The Yorkshire Wildlife Trust has expressed concern on exactly that level. Why is it that we're not proposing in the conditions that you simply ban pets or ban cats or do something to protect wildlife from the risk of being decimated by pets from the owners on this site?
Again, as a separate condition on the outline, there is a requirement for a sink management plan. The habitat specifically related to newts and the willow tit, and there are also several species of butterfly sit within the sink in the south and southeastern edges of the site. There is a sink management plan, and there is, and as a condition in respect to fencing, the sink management plan contains details of fencing that would effectively prevent access from any pets that might be brought onto the site. The sink management plan contains provision for regular inspection of that fencing and also for regular proactive inspection and management of the habitat contained within that fencing.
But if I'm correct, we could simply say no cats. We could have a condition that says that. Paragraph 5.14 says it's unlikely that an appreciable number of cats will be introduced. I'm afraid if you're a willow tit or any of the other species in that site, an appreciable number is more than enough to kill you off. I just want to understand if we could have a condition saying no cats.
You would have to determine that that cat had come in not from one of the surrounding properties, or was a feral cat, or you would have to determine that it had come from one of the residents.
Well, we're talking about the resident.
No, I think what would go on. I'm just, oh, sorry. No, I'm looking at you for this because we've got, it's whether or not it passed the test.
This is, yeah, as you're saying, I think you're about to say, Becky, that
go on, you do it.
Just to remind members that this is a reserved matters application. That means that the only matters that members are able to consider are the 4 reserved matters, which are appearance, landscaping, layout, and scale of the development. Members cannot revisit the principle of the use that was approved, which was for leisure facilities or leisure-related development. So the only conditions that can be imposed on a reserved matters application are conditions which directly relate to the reserved matters. And I'm at the moment struggling to see how a condition preventing residents from bringing cats onto the premises relates to any of those 4 reserved matters.
And I was going to say, in terms of even if we did, which we're advising that we don't think it could, it's the reasonableness of that condition. And if we could actually enforce it, from my point of view, that I'm not necessarily sure we could, because as everything that Eric's just said, I just am not convinced that we could reasonably enforce that.
Just before you do, I think Councillor Nelson had a supplementary related. Has it been covered off, or is it something?
No, it was just a wonder whether within the sort of environmental management and landscape management plan, there's a provision perhaps to say any pets brought by residents must be kept under control or something like that. As a dog owner, I know that you couldn't take your dog to a campsite, for example, and just let it run loose. You wouldn't be able to do that anyway. And I assume that within whatever rules there are, the site owners are very capable of saying you may bring your pets, absolutely, but you can't let your cat loose around the site, for example. But I was wondering whether that would be something that could sit within that environmental management plan. But if not, I also feel like, while I accept and understand Councillor Bassey's concerns, this is perhaps something that could be even an informative, just saying there are concerns around this. Can your rules around residents be?
it's a reserve matters, that's the issue, so we can't
So
really
this would
go
have been
down.
within the environmental or landscape?
No, because it's covered under the original, and if we'd have wanted,
Fine.
we should have, as Sandra said, it should have come under the outline.
And there's no way we can in a sort of put a little, well, that's fair enough.
Okay. I'm sort of conscious that last time in this committee, we spent a lot of time discussing horses in underpasses, and now we've cats and caravans. It's not to say that it isn't. I do understand exactly where you're coming from, Councillor Bassey, but it isn't where I necessarily thought that the debate would go to. You had another question, I think, Councillor Bassey.
It's about the whole question of residency, which in a sense was touched on by Councillor Stewart earlier. I think what concerns local residents here, and what concerns me reading these plans, we're hearing about hours of operation or who can go and visit a restaurant and all of that. When this was considered before, there would have been an application to increase the number of days from 28 to for all year. And that had been turned down. My understanding is, I think it's 150 days or something. It's half a year. I think the current planning approval relates to how long, no more than 183 days in any one calendar year. One of the things that I think is brought out by the concerns we're raising here is the degree to which this site becomes a permanent site by stealth and by having restaurants and gyms and other things. I think concerns remain for many people, and they're particularly acute in my ward, where other sites have also suffered from planning conditions relating to these kinds of activities. When I looked again at this definition of what a resident was going to be and not be on the previous application, it was clear that this is for holiday accommodation purposes only. But I took the trouble to look at what other local authorities do to clarify that. And it seems to me that it would be helpful.
Councillor Bassey, we need to go to a question if we're
Yes, it would be helpful as part of that if we were clearer as to what is meant by a guest, what is meant by a permanent accommodation, what is meant by a permanent resident. And I'd like to know if that could be attached as a condition to refine what was said before, not to change, not to reverse it, but to qualify it, to ensure that it's understood, because otherwise I fear what I see is eventually this becoming a sports arena and all sorts of other things.
I'm going to go to Sandra just
Yeah,
for that clarification, but I think she's
Yeah.
probably going to remind us of the areas that we do have and don't have.
That's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Am I right in thinking that you're saying that there was a condition put on the outline consent relating to what is a visitor or relating to visitors?
I'm suggesting that it could be clearer, and it would help, given that we now got an application that includes a whole load more things than was in the previous application, if that clarity was in this document.
My question was, are you talking about amending an existing condition on the outline consent?
Adding clarity to the condition, not changing
yeah.
the condition. The
Well,
condition, sorry.
You can't, the outline condition is made that we're not there to do anything to do with that.
Yes, we cannot, at a reserved matters approval stage, Chair, you're right, revisit the outline consent, and nor can a reserved matters approval in any way detract from what was agreed at the outline consent. So they cannot go away with less than they got at the outline consent as a result of the reserved matters application. So we cannot revisit the conditions on the outline consent through a reserved matters approval.
Okay, so let me clarify again. So is in that original condition, when it made clear that it was for holiday accommodation purposes only, was the intention there that no one could be a permanent resident?
I don't know what the intention was at the time, but we cannot revisit the conditions on the outline consent. We cannot vary those conditions through this reserve matters approval. That would require a separate, to vary the conditions on the outline consent would require an application to vary conditions on the outline consent, and that application is not before members.
Okay.
Is that supplementary
Thank
to
you very
this?
much.
Okay, councillor Fisher.
If you look at condition 2, prior to commencement of development beyond site layout works, full detail of the proposed fencing to separate the sink from accessible areas shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. Now that suggests to me that we do have some control over the fencing. Could we not specify in that not only is the fencing sufficient to, shall we say, well, it's sufficient to keep cats out of the sink area? Could we not specify it has to be a cat-proof fence that cats cannot get through?
Yes.
Right. And is that specifically stated in that condition? Because if it isn't, I would like to say that the fencing should be cat-proof. Because just to give you an idea, the willow tit is one of Britain's rarest birds. There are 3,500 pairs. There are 3 sites in Yorkshire that have it: Fair Bunnings, this site, and Strensall Common. It's a red list species. It's illegal to kill it, to disturb it in any way.
So Becky's confirming that if we wish to amend that condition to be specific in the wording of that, the material that goes into the fence, that is something that we would be able to amend. So again, when we get to that point, I will make a note, and if we can all make sure that we just agree some form of wording on that. Okay, I had councillor Nelson for a question.
Thank you. Moving on from cats. I actually wanted to ask a couple of questions about accessibility on the site. There are just a couple of things that stood out to me as slightly odd. One of them being in the welfare facilities toilet block area. In the women's toilet side, there are 2 disabled cubicles, but in the men's toilet side, there is 1 disabled cubicle, which made me kind of, is there an expectation that less men visiting the site are disabled than women? It just stood out to me as a slightly unusual thing.
Yeah, no, we can only go with what they've given to us, and that's what they've applied for. Is the
Would we be happy that meets our access requirements? Having 1 cubicle, that's enough to meet the sort of accessibility.
But that's just in that welfare bit. There will be
Yeah,
others
and then there are
throughout the
disabled
site.
toilets
Yes.
throughout the site, which is the other question that I had actually in terms of the other one that sort of stood out to me was in the swimming pool area, the disabled toilet is in the reception, which would mean, and then there are there's a fire exit next to it between the pool and the reception. But if that fire exit was a closed off exit area, it would mean that anyone who had additional needs and needed to use the accessible toilet from the swimming pool bit would have to go all the way through the changing rooms and back out to reception to use the toilet. I was wondering whether there's anything we could do about making sure that they could use that fire exit access to access the facilities. It seemed to me that the facilities are fine. It was more about the logistics of kind of the movement through that building and making sure that that works for people who have those additional needs.
I see what you're saying and I understand it, but from a planning point of view, what we have to look at is the facilities, and they're there and it can happen. And we think we've looked at it as a round, and we think that that's fine. And is it reasonable for us to go above and beyond when they are providing those facilities and we do know how they can be used? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we couldn't just, ask for a right of access through a door, for example.
I don't know how the specifics of that door will work, if it might have to be closed all the time, if it's a fire door. That's why we've taken it as it is with the access, because that fire door may need to be closed for the majority of the time. So reasonably, I don't think we could, given where we're at with it.
One of the other things that was raised in the report was accessible parking in terms of the staff accommodation bit as well. Is there anything that, in terms of conversations that you've had around that? Because I know that came up in the report as a concern.
In terms of the static caravans, which was a particular issue, they are all level access with 2 parking spaces.
I saw that. That's good.
The conversation I've had with the applicant agent in respect of the staff accommodation again is that they would be readily accessible
Okay.
by anybody with a disability.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fisher, I'd got you on my list. I don't know whether it was a different question or if we covered you. Okay, any further questions? Not seeing further hands. So if we can then move into debate, and again, just reminding you that this is the opportunity to express a view, but not necessarily make a proposal. And if you've heard a view expressed that you agree with, just agree with it. That's fine. And we carry on. So just inviting any members who wish to give any comment. Councillor Burton.
I guess comment. I thought what you were saying, Councillor Stewart, just to re-raise it, sounded very sensible in terms of just expanding that wording around how it's managed, what that management plan is, just on the condition for that element around who is a resident. I think that's a sensible thing to put forward, so I'd be supportive of that. On the world of cat fences, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if covering it in a fence. I don't know what makes a fence cat proof. They're pretty wily. Well, I don't know what a cat proof fence would look like, and whether they would prefer to use a management tool rather than a cat proof fence as a solution. So I don't know if it's about being as specific as that, but I'm aware that it's difficult for us because we're not allowed to put other things in. But I'm just wary that a cat-proof fence could look like a 10-metre tall barrier made out of glass or something.
Officers are assuring me that cat-proof fences do exist. They are a thing.
Just interject slightly, Chair. It is like a deer-proof fence that you would get around a site to prevent damage by deer entering it.
Okay, any further comments from anybody else? Councillor Stewart.
Probably a good thing it was off the microphone here. I just want to just make a point on noise, because obviously noise is referred a lot in the report, and noise isn't something that particularly concerned me because I think it, you know, for outside, I mean, partly because of where the site is, but also because I think that is one thing that is absolutely self-policing. You know, if you've got a noisy bar or whatever, the first people that will be annoyed about that are the people in the dozens of caravans around. And so I think this, you know, caravan site, by serving its residents, will naturally serve the noise issues. There are obviously various concerns I might have had with things that aren't part of it. I mean, for example, 80 tourers. If hypothetically speaking, every tourer stayed for one night, which is extremely unlikely, that's an incredible amount of traffic. I'm sure they'll have a minimum stay of several nights now. But that's obviously the problem of outline and reserve matters, that, you know, things that come about one or not the other. So yeah, I made my comments earlier. You know, but I think the point is we just need to, you know, clarify. And for me, it doesn't have to be necessarily here at the committee. I'm happy to leave it to officers. But the whole point about what a visitor is, and just have that, you know, as a rule. And I'm not particularly concerned about where the line is. But if we don't have a line for where, you know, clear idea of where the line is, then it will just be a drip, drip, drip. And, you know, if somebody can come and stay in your caravan, as I read it, it would be a very difficult situation for one of the camp officials to say, you cannot come for a drink. And if you can come for a drink, then you can stay for, you know, a few hours. And if you can stay for a few hours and set precedents like that. So I think that's just why I want that firming up on the wording. But I say, for me, I don't necessarily think that has to be done here.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. I think that, you know, fundamentally this is a reserve matters application, and a lot of the things that we've talked about aren't actually up for grabs in the way that perhaps we would like them to be, but we're past that point in terms of what we are actually looking at. You know, I think from the very outset it was made very clear the numbers of touring caravans, the number of static caravans, these are the things, they are within the numbers that were agreed. I agree that there's there was a bit of confusion around the buildings, and actually I think this perhaps just could have been something that was pulled out a bit better in the report. My understanding is, and when I've looked at all the buildings that have been added are existing buildings, and there is a line in the report, but I think when I came to that, I was like, oh, it took me a little while of checking back plans and aerial photographs to figure out what was going on. The fact that all those buildings exist already makes it sort of less of a big shock than the idea that suddenly there's a load of additional structures being added to the application, which clearly isn't what's happening. I think, again, we're quite restricted about that anyway, because as you've said, there was the requirement for an entertainment plan. The use of those buildings has changed since the outline application went in because of conditions and conversations that came out of that outline application, if my understanding of it is correct. And from an environmental perspective, knocking down buildings has its own sort of environmental issues anyway. So I personally feel like most of what we've been given is very much what was promised. The changes fit within the landscape of conditions and conversations that this application has had up to this point. And I think that there's not a lot we can do other than approve this, to be honest, even if I'd like a second disabled cubicle in the men's toilets. But I would be very supportive of a cat-proof fencing. I apologise, Councillor Stewart. I actually feel like the wording of condition 6 is pretty clear and functional. We as a planning committee can never be in charge of running this campsite. That's not our job as a planning committee. I feel like condition 6, for me, and by all means, people may disagree with me, I feel like condition 6 puts the bones in of there are no visitors will not be able to access the facilities, the owners of the site have agreed with that, and the minute details of who's friends with who and who might have snuck past the reception desk without being seen, that is the day-to-day management that the site is responsible for within the realms of that condition. That would be my view on it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vassie.
Thank you. I should like to put a bit of context to this, and people might find it a bit difficult, but I think it needs to be done. This site is on top of one of the largest coal mines in Europe. It could be providing power to 1,200 homes. A series of planning applications have resulted in that not happening. Personally, I think that's a tragedy. We talk about conservation. I understand that people find it difficult that we should talk about cats for a while, but it's easy to pay lip service to conservation. And between us, we've actually come up with a solution that I think will benefit the local environment. So it is worth doing that. There are things in the previous approval and in this that mention tourism. For tourism to be a benefit from this site, I raise the issues I do because if everyone lives there permanently, there are no tourists. So all these issues are important, and we are where we are. But I think it's important that we pay attention to these and we look at them seriously, both here and for the future. And again, this issue of who's there and who's not there, yes, it's partly about who can visit the bar. But if you imagine 20 or 30 of these permanent static caravans sending 30 children to a local school because they're there permanently, you can see that all these things have repercussions down the road. And we are where we are. I accept we are where we are, but I think we need to rehearse these issues and be aware of them rather than just slipping endlessly into conceding more and more. I've not yet decided whether I can support this. I'm glad of some of the conditions that have been put in place. I'm not opposed to a campsite whatsoever, but I have reservations about how we've got to where we are.
Thank you. Any further comment? Anybody? I'm not seeing any more hands. Just to be clear, at this stage, there's some suggestions around conditions that may or may not be changed, and we do need to make sure that everybody's clear that they want those. So I will just test that in terms of things, and it is often frustrating when you get to a reserved matters application, you see some of the detail that hasn't been thrashed out in a outline application, and I think a general thing for us all as members of the planning committee to hold in mind is moments where we do feel frustrated by a reserved matters application. The next time we go to an outline application, it's just trying to make sure that we are satisfied that we've covered, and there will always be something that gets through, but you know, the more that we pay attention at the outline stage, these sorts of situations don't occur, and I do see and understand your frustration at that, but we also can only operate within the framework that we're operating in. In terms of the conditions that have been suggested, I am going to come to asking for a proposal on the recommendation, but I think it's probably worth just sorting out the condition parts first. So I think there's been a couple of conditions that have been suggested to be changed. Condition 2 to include wording around a cat-proof fence. I think from looking at the room, everybody's in agreement with that. Councillor Fisher, did you have a comment? Just pop your microphone on.
Deer fencing will not stop cats.
Yeah.
Because it's 6 feet of basically of wood and cats can climb up it. A cat-proof fence has to have an overhang at the top so the cats can't get up it.
Yeah, I think
we will. I'd be more tempted to put domestic animals in the wording.
Okay. And then regards condition 6, which was around the visitors to the site and how that is managed in terms of guests on the site and that sort of thing. I think Councillor Nelson sort of outlined the way in which she envisaged the condition working and operating as it is written, and I think other people have suggested that they feel that some tightening up of the wording is what they'd like to see. I'm aware that Becky's got a suggestion as well. What I'd like to just get a gauge on, if I may, just by a very quick show of hands, those who feel that the condition wording is okay as it is, if you could just show now. And anybody who feels that it needs to be tightened up further, if you could just show now. And any are you not clear on what I'm asking? No. Sorry, let me go again. So condition 6, which is the wording that's specifically around the facilities on the site and access for visitors and the potential for day visitors, and some of the point that Councillor Stewart was making about the various degrees of visitation that could or could not be allowed. So if I can just see by show of hands, all of those who are satisfied that condition 6 is as written.
Thank you. Yeah, just one point, which I say, I'm not, my view is not where the line should be, it's clarity on the line.
I understand.
And if you look at 6, it's got a reason. And the reason where we talk about the visitors is to minimise the traffic generation and secure the amenity of neighbouring properties. And to minimise the traffic generation must mean it is about the number of visitors coming to the site, arriving to the site. And then we talk about all facilities in the site. Now, what is a facility? Now, I think people would say a facility is a swimming pool, or a facility is a restaurant, okay? It's not, for example, a static caravan. But if we're talking about traffic, that must be visitor numbers. So I'd say just on that one point alone, that needs tightening up.
So that's, and what I'm seeking a gauge on is if the majority of members of the committee, then we've possibly got some suggestions for how we might move forward. But I don't want to go there if the majority of members of the committee are happy with the current wording. So if I can just see by show of hands, if you're happy with condition 6 wording as is, can you just show now? And if I can see those who are not happy with the wording as is. 5. Okay, so it comes down to my casting vote. I am happy with the wording as is, but I'm actually happy to just hear the solution that Becky is suggesting, and then we can see whether or not we think that covers all bases.
So my suggestion isn't to amend 6, it's potentially to add a further one that would ask for a scheme to limit access into the site to individuals holidaying at the site only. So from what I'm getting from what you've said and from what reasonably we can do in terms of enforcement, if there was some gatehouse potentially that would limit access in and out, that would be a way of doing it enforcement wise. I've got to think about whether or not it's reasonable from a planning enforcement point of view. And I think that condition 6 needs to stay as it is. But I think if you want the further level of to cover further, then potentially you would have to look at a scheme to limit access into the site just to individuals holidaying there, if that's where you're going with it.
Councillor Fisher.
I don't.
Thank you. I remember the discussion we had at outline stage. We torturous discussion about how long in a year people should be allowed to stay there, and it was 6 months in the end, which probably means that some of those caravans are going to be unoccupied for a substantial part of the year if they're owned by a private individual and they can only be there for 6 months, which of course means the more people who come on site unsupervised, the more danger there is of people stealing from them. So I think it's very much in the interest of the operators to have some kind of regulation to make sure that people don't go on there without being monitored.
I don't want to go around the debate too long. I think if I can summarise Councillor Nelson's point, she, I think, felt that condition 6, coupled with the fact that the operators will want to manage a safe site and all of those sort of things, she felt that that was sufficient to make this acceptable. That's what we're determining. Do we feel it's sufficient to make it acceptable? I think that the wording that Becky's proposing adds a layer of limitation, which I think probably speaks to the point that Councillor Nelson felt there would already be that there. For my money, I think that 6 is fine, covers it. I think if you want to really belt and braces it, we could add that additional condition without it being particular. You know, it doesn't add anything very much more, I don't personally feel, but if that is enough to make everybody feel that it's acceptable. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks. I think the points about it, I mean, for example, if you go to Primrose Valley at Filey, there's a massive Wetherspoons, you know, and that's going to be a game changer. That's not just going to be used by people at Primrose Valley, that's going to be used by people in the Filey area going to Wetherspoons. Okay, now the question is how far this can go on a sort of step-by-step basis. And I don't think they're going to have a big Wetherspoons or anything like that, or a Burger King as they've got at the thing. But just sort of Becky's. But the point is, you know, where is the line? And if you're staying there, you have to have visitors. They'll have people come in to wash the caravans or do all sorts of things. There'll be people who can't get out. They'll have a doctor come in, everything like that. It's just, for me, it's clarity about that line. So I would suggest it should be a steer to the owner, the applicant, the developer, or not the developer, about, you know, having that plan so that people cannot come to the site with the intention of using the facilities for an unreasonable amount of time. They cannot, for example, stay over in static caravans if they're not part of the people that are paying, and it's covering off those sorts of things. Otherwise, you know, if you're not saying somebody can go into the facility like the restaurant, but they do in practice go for half an hour, where's that line? So I'm sure there'll be something at the gate anyway in terms of barrier code, everything like that.
I'm just, so say for example, your Wetherspoons, that would have needed permission on its own right. They'd have had to do highway surveys, all the rest of it. So they've only got, they will only have permission for these facilities here, no more. If they were to add to it, they'd have to apply for planning permission. We're skating on a very fine line between what should have been covered in the outline and what we're trying to cover now. And in terms of reasonableness, I can see that Sandra's already looking at me in terms of what we're suggesting. So officer advises that you stay with 6, condition 6 as it is, because we think it's sufficient and there will be mechanisms in there. If not, I think to go with a scheme for some kind of limiting access to individuals is the next best step.
I'm going to just come quickly to Councillor Nelson, quickly to Councillor Stewart. I'd like to just not spend forever on this.
Thank you. Just because my name has been used in vain a couple of times here, so I just thought I would clarify. I feel like Councillor Stewart says earlier his relatives, family, friends run a caravan park or run caravan parks, if I remember rightly. Important thing being that they run the caravan parks, and it is not our job to run a caravan park or a site like this, and nor is it the job of planning conditions. Becky said earlier, we have to condition things that are enforceable. It just seems to me that while it's really important that there is a plan and a way of managing visitors and a way of managing transport, that is the job of the site owner and the people who run it. The condition that is here gives them a very strong steer and already in an enforceable way stops visitors using the facilities. So that has a limiting role that would be successful because it is enforceable. It seems to me that adding an additional thing that if you allow, or if it is found that some of your residents have visitors, actually planning can enforce that because you've broken a condition, that just seems like an unnecessary addition to, and not part of our role. It is not our job to decide for this site owner who, you know, how they deal with people that aren't allowed on site, for example. So for me, I just would like to reiterate, I suppose, I'm really happy with, I think condition 6 gets our point across. There may be discussions that can be had about how this is a concern for the committee that the chair might be able to add, you know, to the end of this decision. But it is not our role as a committee to, in a legal and enforceable way, bar all visitors from visiting this site in all circumstances, because that is the role of the people who are running the site. That's how, you know.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, if you want to just very briefly.
I mean, 2 points. That's absolutely not the case. Every caravan park owner out there would absolutely love it if the world worked like Councillor Nelson, that they could get on with running their site. There's actually a massive different bits of legislation and things control it in terms of who can stay at the house, the site, in terms of statics, lodges, you know, precedents for development, staying residential. So there's a whole host of, I think. Okay, the planning has a lot to do with it, actually. You know, it really does. I say the point about the enforcement is where is the line? And for me, the line with this condition is I can visit someone's caravan, but I can't use the toilet. And for me, that's a stupid line.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to, I think the simplest thing is I'm just going to take a vote on, are we going to add this additional condition or are we going to stick with number 6? So we've said that we stick with number 6 already. Our members, can I just see by show of hands if they would like to see this additional condition that Becky has proposed being added? And if you could just read it again, Becky, just so everybody is aware.
So a scheme to limit access into the site to individuals holidaying at the site only. I'd have to word it slightly better than that, but that's, you get the gist of it.
Okay, all those in favour of adding that condition to make this application acceptable to them? All those against? Okay, that falls. So I'm now seeking a proposer to test the officer recommendation with the amended condition 2. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, I will move the amended recommendations, including the additional one regarding the domestic animal proof fence.
Thank you. And I think I saw Councillor Whitcroft indicate.
Yes, seconded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So if you could just summarise very briefly, Becky, and then we will vote.
So the application is recommended for approval as per the conditions in the additional information and the amendment to condition 2, the wording to be agreed. We will write it and then agree with the chair and deputy chair. Okay.
Okay, all those in favour of that proposal, if you could show now, please. Anybody against, if you could show now, please. And any abstentions? Okay, so with 2 abstentions and everybody else in favour, that is approved. And so I will therefore just take a very brief amendment because I'm conscious of time now. If we could come back, please, at 6:45. Thank you. Everybody to this evening's meeting of Planning Committee A. We are now moving on to agenda item 4C, which is the Pavers Limited at Catherine House, Northminster Business Park. So Becky, if you could talk us through the plans, please.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a full planning application for extension to the existing facility to provide storage, integrated distribution, logistics centre with a B8 use, with ancillary office, welfare space, service yard, parking areas and landscaping. So you can see this is the view, site viewed from the site southeast. The view towards the site from the existing car park, and a view from the southwest across the site towards the existing site. So this is your site location plan here. Existing Northminster Business Park within here, and the red line here. This is the proposed site layout here that you can see. I'm just gonna, this not to cause confusion, but this is the pre-revision site layout, because this shows the next door DPD and the existing facility here, whereas the new one doesn't. I'll explain in a second. So this is the proposed extension here, and the landscaping along with the lorry bays and the car parking and cycle parking. There has been amendment since this one that actually increases the number of car parking space, increases the number of bicycle spaces and reduces the car parking spaces by 2. That's the difference between the two. Just that scheme obviously shows the existing Pavers site and the DPD next door. I'm going to leave it on that one, but that's not the one that you'll be voting on. The one that you're voting on is the one with the increased cycle facilities and car parking. In terms of your elevations, that's the elevations there, that again, they're in your agenda pack. I'll leave it on that for you to see. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So any questions of clarification on the plans? No. Okay, so if I can go over, and apologies, I didn't actually introduce you today. So we're joined by Jonathan Kenyon, who's the development manager who's been handling this application. Have you got any updates for us on the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've circulated the update. It's just following on from the points Becky raised there about the drawings. The site plans have been updated, so that the recommendation changes. So the site plans that we'd approve are updated references. The only change in respect of those plans are in the car park and affecting the cycle parking, as Becky explained. And just for clarification and covering some which are errors in the report, that the amount of cycle parking spaces proposed would be 80 spaces. And the other element to the committee updates is just a clarification on the economic benefits as set out in sections 5.22 and 6.3 of the report. And just bullet points around those are, in terms of job creation, the proposals will directly create an additional 130 full-time equivalent roles at Pavers. 40 of those would be in the warehouse. Again, that's a correction compared to the report, which mentions 30. So it's 40 jobs at the warehouse opposed to 30. And also the remainder of that 130 is 90 office jobs, and they'll be combined. Some of those will be at the site and some of them will be at offices which are elsewhere. Economic benefits, just to clarify, the annual contribution to GVA from the extension itself is 6.44 million, and that's combined with the 17.03 from the existing operations. So cumulatively, that's an annual contribution to GVA of 23.48. The 51.99 referred to in the committee report, that's the total from the expansion alone over a 10-year period, and that's the extent of the update.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will move us now to the public participation section. We've got one registered speaker, who is Jason Paver, the Managing Director of Pavers. If you'd like to come to the table, and you're being joined by Jim Young, Head of Facilities at Pavers, and Philip Holmes from the Planning Consultants. So first of all, can I apologise for the amount of time you've had to wait today? Sorry, it's the way we do things at the moment. We are looking at whether we can find a way of not having to make people sit through lots and lots of other applications, but we do appreciate you being here. You will have seen that you have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a heads up if I think you're going to run over that, and then do please stay seated because there may be questions from members. And if you'd just like to start in your own time.
Good evening. I'm Jason Paver, Group Managing Director at Pavers. Pavers is a family-owned business that's been based in York for the past 50 years. It was founded by my grandmother, Kathy, in 1971 with a £200 bank loan. And we're incredibly proud that the business has grown from our York base to employ over 1,850 people with over 185 stores nationwide. And we have donated over £2 million to charity since 2018. In the past few years, we've seen a rapid growth in the business, including over 700% growth in our online sales. This has left us facing ongoing operational constraints as we've quite simply run out of space. To meet the demands of the business, we've relied on external storage in various locations around the country, increasing transport delays and costs. This is both expensive and unsustainable. We need to expand our current premises into larger, highly technical logistics and distribution centre. Our proposals are not only necessary to maintain business efficiency and profitability, but they go to the heart of Pavers' long-term future and our desire to keep our operations in the City of York. We are in a highly competitive retail sector, and if we don't act now, then it does threaten our economic viability. We've undergone an extensive review of the application following the outcome of the November committee meeting in 2022. We've listened to the feedback, we've taken the comments very seriously, and we've worked hard to address technical concerns. We've submitted detailed economic evidence on the operational capacity constraints, as well as our growth options and improved travel plans. This included assessing the expansion of our current headquarters, using the allocated employment site to the south of Northminster Business Park, and moving out of the City of York altogether. The evidence suggested that a new facility outside of York would offer us the greatest long-term economic advantage to the business. However, as a long-standing York company, our overriding preference is to expand our current location and stay in the city where I was brought up and our family business was founded over 50 years ago. To stay in York, we need an expansion plan that allows us to keep the physical connection of our state-of-the-art automated logistics system that's already in use. Crucially, a single site operation would also significantly reduce vehicle movements, which would have an important environmental benefit. We're pleased that our efforts to work in partnership with the planning department has enabled us to provide evidence to sufficiently demonstrate our very special circumstances, recognised by the planning officer who has recommended our application for approval. We're also grateful for the strong support from partners in the city, including the Council's Committee for Economic Development, the Chamber of Commerce, York Civic Trust, and local MPs. If our proposals are approved, it would enable Pavers to remain at our established headquarters and secure our foreseeable future in York, retain and grow our local workforce, creating 130 new jobs, the majority of which are higher skilled, and finally, to provide an important contribution to the future economic growth of York, cumulatively worth over £200 million over the next 10 years. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So if you just sit tight, and if there's any questions from members, if you could just indicate now. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. I was wondering, obviously there's the DPD warehouse directly to the south of York. Have you had any conversations with DPD or with the landowners or about kind of the possibility of them moving? I don't know if that's a kind of the sort of conversations you would have around this, but.
So DPD, I believe this site only opened probably 3 years ago.
Less.
I wouldn't have thought that would be an opportunity or something that's available to us, I'm afraid.
Councillor Fisher.
Ask you, why did you not acquire that site when it was available?
I believe it's mentioned in the report, we were under the impression that we had an unwritten agreement that site would be available to us, and it was unwritten. So it was always our intention that was the sort of the route of expansion.
Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, you said you've grown online 700% in the last few years, and it references 700% in here as well. But I think I'm right in saying it doesn't give how many years. So how many years is that over, please?
From COVID onwards, we saw the initial
obviously spike during COVID when a number of people moved to online. And then that continued through COVID and then has stayed up at that pitch and then continued on growth upwards even after stores reopened.
Yep, sorry, just to add, it's the 700% is over the last 3 to 4 years with a 400% within the last 1 to 2.
Any further questions, Councillor Stewart?
I suppose the obvious question is what if the growth, you know, continues? I mean, what amount of growth can you have within the constraints of, you know, the York site as approved if it was, you know, how much would there be another thing coming back in a few years' time potentially? Obviously, it'd be a good situation.
So our expectation is that this will allow this using the technology that we already have in the existing facility, it will allow us to more than double our business size. So it would take us to over £500 million in revenue, which whilst an exciting prospect is probably not going to happen sort of immediately. But in terms of further expansion, we've already sort of started the discussion with the planning team about the next local plan and making sure that any further expansion, for example, south on the map that's in front of us, so behind DPD would be the sort of the route that we would take. There are multiple large retailers around the country who use single site distribution centres. So it's economically it's viable, and so it's just been making sure that we could make that work. But like I say, we envisage this being a good medium term solution for us.
Okay, any further questions? I think I saw Councillor Merritt.
Yes, obviously welcome the reapplication given the importance of your business. Nonetheless, this obviously is a significant potential further intrusion into the green belt. Can I just ask about the landscaping arrangements? Are you going to be planting semi-matures and other, you know, in order to try and get the protection up as fast as we reasonably can?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think it's in the report already, but yeah, our intention would be to start with some very mature trees and implement that plan with immediate effect if approved, and create the boundary and get the landscaping started as soon as possible to give it its best shot prior to even commencing any building works.
And is it going to be a reasonable variety of types of trees so that it doesn't, in effect, present the regimented row of soldiers that you have on the system?
It's detailed in the landscape proposal that it would be a good mix of deciduous. It wouldn't be a row of Leylandii conifer or something like that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, and I think I saw a flicker from Councillor Nelson.
It was just a clarification, actually, going back to Councillor Stewart's question earlier about, actually it was my question, wasn't it? Sorry, about you thought that there was an unwritten agreement about that land that DPD. Does that mean you did try to acquire it or have conversations, but it wasn't offered to you?
We had a number of conversations and ongoing conversations with Northminster Estates about that land and the availability prior to the planning application going in for our previous extension. However, it was never envisaged that that whole site would go. At that time, they had odd proposals for small developments. However, at the point that DPD came, they took a whole 7 acres, which ate up the whole amount. Schemes that Northminster had drawn up at that time accommodated smaller sort of 50,000 square foot warehouses, but always kind of left a gap between our existing building and the development. So there was always something that would be there. And we always said that if anybody came to the table, that they would always come to us to discuss that with us, next steps. However, when they came with DPD, it didn't allow any space. So effectively landlocked us into our current position.
Sorry, can I just add on to that? It's probably worth noting that allocation to the site ST19 goes back to the 2016 preferred sites consultation. So there's probably a 3 to 4 year period where Pavers would have thought they were comfortable in terms of having expansions expansion space before they were landlocked by DPD, after which the ship sort of sailed by the time in terms of the local plan process. So there wasn't the opportunity to promote it then at that time in 2021, 22, you're into the hearings already.
And if that land had been available at this point, would that land have met your requirements?
I think we're probably getting into,
Sorry,
we
I
just
think
have to deal with the
there's-
application.
because
I understand where you're going, and I understand where you're going,
I
but
don't think you do, because it's because of the reference to a conveyor belt, and it's probably a really stupid question, because my question is, does a conveyor belt have to be in a straight line?
No, it does not.
No, it doesn't.
Thank you.
Connectivity is what we require. And so if it was to the south or to the west as the proposal, that is what, it's just that connectivity of buildings. No, we can go around corners.
Any further questions from members? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your time this evening. And again, apologies that you had to wait so long to come and speak to us. So I'll move us now to questions to officers on the report and anything that you've heard. So again, invite members if you have questions. Councillor Stewart.
It's probably one which the answer is going to be, it would depend, we can't say, etc. But is there any principal difference on the green belt aspect between something which would extend the green belt and something which would sit in the green belt?
I'm really sorry, I don't understand the question.
In terms of boundaries of the green belt and
Right.
where it sits, when you have a green belt boundary here,
Yeah.
and it's basically looking to extend the boundary as opposed to it sitting in there distinctly, would that have any principal difference?
This isn't looking to extend the green belt boundary, it's going to be in the green belt. So it's not extending the green belt boundary has got to be done through the local plan process, not this process. I'm really not got.
I think what Councillor Stewart is asking is there a difference between building a new freestanding structure in the green belt and extending an existing structure into the green belt? I think the answer you're going to give is no.
No, not really. I wonder, I'll have a go at paraphrasing you as well. Is the question that you're asking the difference? Is there a difference in terms of redrawing the boundary of the green belt to extend it? Sorry, well, I presume to reduce it to enable a space that could be then developed versus you've got the existing green belt and you're going over that boundary to build the same building. Is that essentially? Are you taking out a piece of land out of the green belt? Or otherwise, is that what you're asking?
Well, that's the nearest.
You're normally so
yeah, I know.
you know, on it with these questions.
You also got the line of development, you know, which obviously effectively is the green belt boundary, yeah, which they're going up to, and then they go beyond it. So they go into the green belt. So the question is that in principle different to something which is not going into the green belt directly, so sort of joining on, but something that's just in the green belt away? It is?
No, because both types of the development are in the green belt. So I've got you. Sorry, it took me a minute. So you're saying if we had an application that was a standalone building in the middle of the green belt, got you, or is it or if it's just something that's extending out into the green belt? Is that what you're meaning?
Yes.
There we go. No, the principle's the same. It's still you've still got to assess it in terms of the green belt and very special circumstances.
God, it's clearly getting to that point of the evening, isn't it? Further questions, further indications, any further questions on the report? Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. My question's more about waiting, I guess. What concerns me, or I mean, everything in planning concerns me, but there's a balance here between an area of the green belt that, from reading the reports, has been quite firmly set down as a very important boundary. You know, it's not that the site hasn't been considered, you know, it's not that the importance of extending the economic, you know, benefits of this bit of land even hasn't been considered. It's the fact that it has been considered and that western boundary has been sort of preserved as being needed to, I think the word in the draft local plan was, it's important to keep this open permanently. And then obviously we have the economic benefits, which are really, really significant to the city as well in a different way. I wondered, with the way that the economy fluctuates and that things change within those kind of economic arguments, I think the Civic Trust said they couldn't possibly have expected the change that happened after COVID, for example. It couldn't have been foreseen previously because no one could see that coming. With the fact that those economic arguments can fluctuate based on markets and things crashing and things taking off in different directions, what does that do to the weight of those economic arguments compared to the weight of what has been discussed in here about Greenbelt, which is those are permanent conversations. This needs to be kept open permanently.
You have to consider what's in front of you now. So once you give, I know I say this all the time. So we can only consider what's in that planning application now and the economic benefits that we see and have had illustrated now. So clearly last time we weren't in the same position in terms of the balance that officers made. And then obviously members accepted the recommendation. Whereas this time we feel that we're in a different position in terms of the economic benefits and the balance and the weight. It's always going to be really close in terms of what you're saying in terms of the implications. But this time officers feel that there has been a tip in the weighting because of the evidence that we've got at this point. But that's what you've got to do. You've got to consider the evidence at this point of time, taking it all in the round.
Okay, Councillor Whitcroft was next, and then Councillor Fisher, I've got you.
Actually, off the back of that answer, I withdraw my question. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, in which case, Councillor Fisher, and then Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, when an area of land is being considered as part of the local plan process, or is put forward development as agreed outside, the ideal situation is that it's put to the local plan as a site, proposed site, and the planning inspectors can consider it. Was that done in this case in any way, shape, or form? No.
No.
So it's not been considered by a planning inspector. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Merritt. Covered. Okay. Any further questions from members? Not seeing at the minute. I've got a question. I just want to clarify. So page 178, paragraph 5.41, which is talking about the BREEAM element, and one way of reading paragraph 5.41 could be that this type of building can only ever get to very good. I think that is my understanding of what the situation is here. I suppose my challenge is, well, should they not then build a different type of building to get to excellent, if that's what we're aspiring towards? And I just wonder if you can just give us just an overview of the conversation that's been had and how we've reached this conclusion.
Yeah, so the recommendation for very good rather than the policy compliant excellent is consistent with the other buildings of similar typologies that we've seen at the business park. So the DPD one to the south, and I believe the other three buildings to the south of that. The reason why we have the flexibility in BREEAM is because it's very wide ranging in the variety of topics that it covers. So it's not strictly refined to the materials you use in a building or the energy efficiency of the building itself. It goes a lot deeper than that. It talks about project management and lots of other wide range of topics about the health and well-being of the people who are using the building once it's operational, which has a lot of weighting in the BREEAM. So because it's essentially a warehouse building where there's very low occupation, it wouldn't be relevant to apply the sort of BREEAM rating topics that we apply to an office building such as this, where things like natural daylight are relevant, and other amenities and features within the building. So it's purely because of that warehouse typology as to why we've relaxed that BREEAM requirement. We feel that's reasonable.
So essentially, I think you're saying it is as good as we could reasonably expect it to be. given the nature of the business and the nature of the building that's.
Correct, yes, and we still have our standard policy requirements in terms of the efficiency of the fabric and the use of renewable technology as well.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Hollier.
Apologies. Do any of the sort of extra policies that are related to ST19 sort of apply in any way? Or is it sort of totally considered separately to that?
We considered them separately. It's similar as we apply the local plan. If we have the policies that are written and apply to strategic sites, we only apply those policy requirements to the strategic sites. So it could be a similar thing with a housing site. You might have a large housing site that's a strategic allocation, and you would apply the policies. But if we got a site that wasn't allocated in the green belt, it wouldn't be a local plan requirement for us to apply those strategic policies to it. So it's a no.
Okay, so in terms of like needing to do a sort of, I don't know, a master plan for the landscape of the site as a whole, that would still only apply to the ST19 bits, but you would still do some landscaping around but then other things like having a good link to the train station in Poppleton, the park and ride, those would still only be sort of relevant to the sort of allocated site. But you might have thought about those on their own accord anyway.
That would be correct. Yes, yeah. We're not explicitly applying the strategic policy, but they have been material considerations. And as was mentioned in response to one of the earlier questions, there is a very comprehensive and detailed landscaping scheme that we have for this. In terms of the access is it's fundamentally as it is existing for the Pavers facility through the site, and that's satisfactory and as direct as it can be to both the park and ride and Poppleton within the confines of the developable area.
Cheers. Okay. Not seeing any further hands for any further questions, so I can move us then into debate. And well, we all know the score by now, so this is just the opportunity to say what people think and try not to repeat each other. But Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. From 2011 to 2019, I had the great honour of representing rural West York, which included this throughout. And throughout my time as a councillor, I was very involved in a lot of things that were inappropriate development in the green belt and fighting those. And I'm very proud of what I helped do on that. And there's no doubt this is inappropriate development, and it's a high bar, that we have to overcome. We've got Upper Poppleton Parish Council and Knapton Parish Council both opposing it, and I would normally be on the same page as them. But for me, where this weight comes is that they've opposed it. They're not here speaking, sort of expect with so many issues. And it's not for me to speak for them, but for me, I think that sort of symbolises the bar, that the bar is it's inappropriate developments in the green belt, and that's an issue. But the other side of things comes for me significantly higher. I think the one comment in the report I found the most interesting was York Civic Trust. It's not York Chamber of Commerce. It's not, make it York. It is York Civic Trust who have such a crucial role in safeguarding the city in so many ways, and that they think this makes sense in the way they think it makes sense. And I think that the economic side of things does make this very unique. We've heard how they can't have one site here, another site here. And I think it's two crucial things, which is that I think this is a company that in many ways probably would be better relocating from York, get some very, very cheap land elsewhere, get some land with better transport links elsewhere, but wants to be in York. And the difference that can make, and we've got all the GVA here, which is mainly about the extension and how much that's worth in terms of jobs and everything like that. But there must be a consideration of the make or break nature of this company. So there's all these principal issues which, really are a concern about extending the green belt, or sorry, building into the green belt, as it were. But, ultimately, that's not what puts food on people's tables at night. And I think that's where I would come down on this application. So I would be very much minded to say that the goods and everything about that significantly actually outweighs the harm on the green belt in this particular area of York. And also I think the points about how a company would plan to expand and how they would factor that in and all of the things, I think that has been addressed. I think at the 700% increase over 3 years, there's not many businesses that are planning for that rate of growth. So we've got a York business that has enjoyed that rate of growth. And so I think that's why we should be looking to back it. So you can probably guess which way I may vote.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher, I had you next.
Thank you, Chair. I deeply wish that Pavers had got the option on the DPD site in writing. The reason for that is I supported the DPD site because it was an site that was allocated for development of it. It was in the green belt. It was in ST19 and would be released when the local plan was approved. And I didn't see the point in risking jobs. This is different. This is not a site that's allocated for development. Now, I'll just bring you back 2 months ago to the February meeting, 3 months ago to the February meeting, when there was an application for a company in my ward, VHE Self-Storage, who wanted to extend into the green belt. They'd already built the development and they wanted to get retrospective planning application. It was refused. 10 votes to 1. There's only one council that supported it. Is there one rule for a very big company and one rule for a very small company? It's a slightly worrying situation that we're treating different businesses different ways. I appreciate Pavers' economic importance, but to me, when we refuse this application, and this one is only 3% smaller with a few different changes to the car parking and to the cycle storage, Councillor Melly summed it up for me. We said we need to use planning grounds. The costs and profits of businesses and individuals we can't take into account. We have planning policies for a reason, properly decided through due process, and this doesn't meet them. Now, I couldn't have put that better myself. I think it was absolutely correct to say that. Now, I'm sure some members will think that the economic benefits of giving this site approval to the Pavers outweigh the principles, but I can't support it. I voted for refusal last time, and I'm sorry, my view, nothing has changed sufficiently to change my opinion of it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nelson.
I think that's a really interesting two perspectives to have let go first, and I'm glad I did that because I have to say I still don't know how I am going to vote about this. I've been really stressed about this ever since reading the papers because I think that this is one of those applications where we almost can't make a right decision. There are so many benefits, but also so many negatives to whatever decision we make as a committee. And I'm really glad that we're here as a committee and that I'm not having to make this decision as an individual. I think if I was to summarise the balance as I see it, I feel like Councillor Fisher, and it's very good of you to quote our Councillor Melly, I think there's a really important point there, and this to make a comparison which isn't directly relevant to the other Greenbelt application we've looked at today. This is a very different, it feels like a very different application. The site is very different because what we have here is the boundary of the city that has been set and looked at and considered as part of all of the local plan processes, as part of all of the other processes, with the understanding that we need more economic land, with the understanding we need to have spaces for businesses to grow. And it's been balanced as part of that local plan process. And the decision at that point by those people over a number of years was that it's really important that this boundary exists. And we're looking at arable land, we're looking at farmland that is, I think it says somewhere, grade A. And once you're built on it, you can't have it back. So I feel like this is one of those moments where we have to make a decision as a committee that has a legacy that is beyond the fluctuations of the market and the fluctuations of how businesses grow and shrink and change over the next 50 years, because once it's built on for the next 100 or 200 years. However, it's also really, really important that we support businesses in York and that we encourage growth and that we find a way to sort of balance the fact that we're a very small city with limited land with the fact that, we are really proud to have some fantastic companies here that need space and we want them to function and we want them to do really well. And a 700% growth is remarkable and wonderful and exactly what we want people to feel like they can get out of having a business in York. And I feel like it's an incredibly difficult decision that the committee is being asked to make, to figure out how we balance that. I feel like I echo a lot of Councillor Fisher's points in my heart, but I also think that Councillor Stewart has made some really good points about the reasons why this does have very special circumstances. So it might not be helpful to kind of put myself on the fence like that. But for me, I do think that the Greenbelt question is so important because we only have so much of it. And the fact there's already been a conversation about the next local plan and which bits and potential future expansion makes me wonder how sustainable even one extension is. This site has already had a site on it, then it's had an extension. This is another extension. There's a potential future extension. We really want businesses to be able to grow like that in the city. But is this the right place for that within our city? I don't know. It would be nice if we could just whip another site out and go, here's the right place.
Another member to see if they can help you one way or another in your deliberation. Councillor Burton.
Yeah, thank you. Just covering some of the points people have talked about. It's I guess I just want to say, I think while this sits outside of the local plan allocation, I don't think we're in a position where if there was a future local plan, this wouldn't be seen as an opportunity for expansion because of the needs of the businesses in this area. And it would seem like a place where we'd think this might be somewhere that we could do business expansion going forward. And that's be heavily supported by the kind of people who would input into a local plan process in the future. The York Civic Trust, the business part of the council, all of these people would input into a future local plan allocation selection. And essentially what we are deciding is whether we retain ourselves to that decision in the process that could take another 10 years, or do we just act kind of practically and say, actually, these things are heavily supported, and this essentially what we're talking about losing is about, a fairly, in terms of what we talk about as a green belt, not a vast area of agricultural land in where there is a huge amount of agricultural land surrounding the city. So I think in terms of what's being put forward, I'm quite happy to be supportive of this application in that sense.
Okay, thank you. I will come to Councillor Fisher in a second. I'm just going to see if anybody else wants to make any contribution, and then I'm happy to come back to you. Councillor Merritt.
I wasn't here when the matter was previously discussed, and I certainly, if that DPD site had been available, I absolutely agree with Councillor Fisher's comment. But I think Ben is right in the sense, if you actually look at the Greenbelt boundary here, it's heavily compromised by the whole business park, frankly, in terms of the visual impact from the A59 and all the rest of it. I actually think with a much better landscaping arrangement than the existing site has, actually it will partly mollify some of the intrusiveness of the existing business park, which I think is a positive in as well as the economic arguments that Councillor Stewart so well covered. It's a greenbelt boundary, basically to stop expansion that is not required, but we do require this. We require this business to stay in York. It's a vital local business. So I think and it is a balanced judgment. I think we ought to be supporting this application with the welcome modifications that have been made since the previous application.
Okay, and as I say, I will come back to you, Councillor Fisher, but Councillor Vassy, you're indicating. Yes, if you're in, I'll take anybody who hasn't spoken first, and then I'll come back round anybody who wants to make any further comments.
I'd just like to dwell a little on the comparison between the first application we considered today and this one. because both of them, as been said by others, are in the green belt, etc., etc. What struck me about the first one was the effort that the applicant was doing in order to demonstrate a commitment to the future, to all the kind of things that we can't ask for because we don't have an approved local plan, we don't have special planning documents that set out rigorous standards for protecting the environment and biodiversity and all of that. I suspect if this application had been put forward by the first applicant, we might be seeing a green roof. I would love to see a green roof on a building like that. To me, that mitigates some of the challenges that people are referring to about the green belt. It's about energy and commitment to being part of the solution as well as part of the problem. I think all the points that have been made about the economic importance of this are very clearly made. I take on board the seriousness of the green belt. I hope that the applicant is hearing that there are actually things that are not that difficult to do that take a site like this and a development like this and mitigate some of those impacts that will benefit the community in the future. And I'd imagine actually that privately the applicant might understand this. It's a shame that we're not able to require it when we ask application to submit, when applications are submitted. But for me, there is a balance there. I think that the economic benefit is significant and is well made. I hope the applicant is listening to various comments that have been made about the things that can be done to make this better. So in principle, I think I'm minded to support.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before I come to Councillor Fisher? I'm going to come to you, and Councillor Stewart, do you want to say something else as well?
Thank you. If you actually notice, the York Civic Trust make what I think is probably a legal suggestion. Common sense approach would be allow the scheme, if necessary, consider the green belt land allocated for development. That green belt land that's allocated for development for industry has been through a planning inspection process. I'm not sure that we could then actually revoke it. My view is that actually the best procedure would have, for Pavers, would have been to appeal the 2022 decision, let a planning inspector take a dispassionate, independent view of it. And I'm sorry that didn't take place, because I think that would have been far better than putting it to a committee in this situation.
Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just to come back, obviously, Councillor Fisher spoke about the Greenbelt application that we saw for the Strensall storage unit a few months ago. And I think for me, there were many better examples Councillor Fisher could have used of the difficulties of Greenbelt balance, because that application was illegal in terms of it was retrospective. They built it, they built it without planning permission. It was a retrospective. Well, I don't know if it's not illegal or what, but it was a retrospective planning application. And obviously this is against the developer, or would-be developer here, who has put it all in the correct way. The storage site could have clearly gone in any one of numerous locations. Here, this couldn't. And in terms of the employment, the storage site would have provided employment to one person. This was about providing employment to dozens of people, or potentially a lot more if you look at the make or break of the business. And I know we're going to stray a bit, Chair, so I won't, but just on the point about Councillor Melly's quote seemed to major on the fact that we couldn't take into account the pounds, shillings and pence of things. Well, we absolutely can.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think we've probably got a very good snapshot of the planning balance that we've all got to make here. I think I'm going to just take the opportunity to just chuck in a couple of thoughts, really. I think the issue of the land, the grade A agricultural land, it is noted in the report, but it is also noted in the report that we're not in short supply of that type of land in the City of York. And I think, you know, for a relatively modest amount of that to be lost, I'm not particularly uncomfortable about that. In a sense, I was going to make a similar point to Councillor Stewart about the previous application in Strensall, on the basis of, you know, that there are always a balance. There are always, you know, you identify the harm, you identify the thing that outweighs, and in this, the difference in this situation is there's quite a significantly different order of magnitude of economic benefit compared to the other application and some other applications that we've found in different ways. I think a point that hasn't perhaps been addressed that I think is a positive of this scheme is the applicant did talk about being able to consolidate an operation and reduce vehicle movements, and actually I'm not sure whether that reduction in vehicle movements is captured in terms of anything BREEAM or other measures, but you know, obviously it is always better to have fewer vehicle movements, fewer vehicle emissions, all of those sort of things. And really for me, the big thing is, if this is a company that has sought various different ways of expanding, has actually found that it could be more profitable to go to a different part of the country, but wishes to stay located in the city, then that shows a level of commitment to the business and to the city that I think also counts in its favour in terms of the weighting of the planning balance, and perhaps does speak to some of the points that Councillor Batty makes around, you know, the sort of longer term environmental impacts and those sort of things. If this is a company that is committed to the city, then actually surely what's good for the city is good for the employees of the company, and vice versa. So for me, I do hear the concern around the sort of creeping expansion into Greenbelt. We don't know whether or not this could have been included within the site had we been 3 years previously when they were looking to expand. But I feel that there's a clear case of special circumstances that's been set out here, and in that respect, I have no hesitation in giving it my support, and that's where I feel I am on it. I think we will, unless anybody has any further comments, go and test the officer recommendation. So obviously this is recommended to approve. I don't recall anybody having suggested any changes to any conditions. So I think it is a testing of the recommendation as set out, and I can already see Councillor Merritt with a hand up. I'm assuming that you're wishing to make a proposal.
Yes, I wish to move the recommendation, including the updates on the plan references and so on.
And Councillor Stewart, you're happy to second, I'm assuming. Thank you. So proposed and seconded. Becky, if you could just summarise what we're voting on.
Councillor Merritt just covered it. So the recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in the report and the update that you've had today. Thank you.
Okay, so by show of hands, if I could see all those in favour of supporting that proposal, if you could show now, please. Okay, and all those against, if you could show now. And any abstentions? Okay, so just.
Sorry, I should have said subject to referral to the Secretary of State. Sorry, sorry.
I think we'll take that as read, and I think with one refusal, one against, one abstained, and everybody else in favour, that is passed, subject to the Secretary of State and approved. So thank you all very much for your time this evening. We don't have any urgent business, and so we